My wife accidentally sent my son's school lunchbox to me. I jokingly showed my colleague who was an EX doctor. He turned pale and said, "Get your son and go to the hospital immediately." "Why?" I asked. "I can't explain now. It's horrible. Do as I say or your son won't survive." What I discovered at the hospital left me speechless. My name is Marcus Hale, and if you'd asked me 6 months ago what my biggest problem was, I probably would have said something stupid like deciding between the BMW or the Tesla for my midlife crisis mobile. Yeah, I'm that guy, 39 years old, running a mid-sized tech security firm called Hale Dynamics, living the American dream one encrypted server at a time. Life had finally stopped kicking me in the teeth long enough for me to catch my breath and actually enjoy what I'd built. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't always smooth sailing. After my first wife died in that car accident 5 years back, I thought I was done. Finished. Ready to pack it in and become one of those bitter divorced dads who drinks beer for breakfast and yells at kids to get off his lawn. But then Clara came along with her sunshine smile and her way of making scrambled eggs that didn't taste like rubber, and suddenly the world didn't seem like such a hostile place anymore. She married me, adopted Oliver, my 9-year-old son who's basically the only reason I bother getting up in the morning. And for the first time since Sarah died, I felt like I could actually breathe again. Oliver's this incredible kid, you know? Smart as a whip, funny in that brutal way only kids can be, and he still thinks I'm some kind of superhero instead of just another guy who lucked into success by being paranoid about computer security. He's got these huge brown eyes that light up when he talks about rockets or dinosaurs or whatever random obsession has captured his attention that week. The kid's my anchor, my purpose, my everything wrapped up in a small package that smells like grape juice and adventured. So there I was that Tuesday morning, sitting in my downtown office with its floor-to-ceiling windows and its view of the city that makes visitors think I'm way more successful than I actually am, getting ready to meet with a potential new client. Dr. Adrian Vaughn used to be some hotshot trauma surgeon until he burned out and decided to pivot into consulting work. The guy had contacted me about upgrading his practice's cybersecurity, which seemed routine enough. In my line of work, you get used to doctors, lawyers, and accountants who suddenly realize their patient files are about as secure as a screen door on a submarine. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Clara. Now, my wife's not usually the type to bother me during work hours. She knows I'm weird about keeping business and family separate. But when I saw her name pop up, I figured it was probably something about dinner plans or reminding me to pick up milk on the way home. You know, normal married couple stuff. Instead, I got this. "Oops. I think I swapped Oliver's lunchbox into your briefcase. He probably has your files." "Sorry, honey." Grinning face with sweat. I actually laughed out loud, which is not something that happens often in my office. The mental image of my 9-year-old sitting in Mrs. Peterson's 4th grade class, opening up a folder full of network security protocols instead of his peanut butter and jelly sandwich, was pretty damn amusing. Clara's always been a little scattered in the mornings. She's one of those people who can't function without at least 2 cups of coffee and a small miracle. So mix-ups like this weren't exactly unprecedented that I popped open my briefcase, and sure enough, there was Oliver's lunch instead of the Vaughn contract I'd been planning to review. This little blue lunchbox covered in superhero stickers that he'd picked out himself, complete with Batman, Spider-Man, and some character I couldn't identify, but that he assured me was totally awesome, Dad. The thing was beat up from months of elementary school abuse, but Oliver treated it like treasure, so I treated it like treasure too. When Dr. Vaughn showed up, tall guy, graying hair, the kind of steady presence you'd want in an operating room, I decided to break the ice with the lunchbox story. "You want to see something that'll restore your faith in humanity?" I said, pulling out the little blue box. My wife accidentally packed my son's lunch in my work bag. Kid's probably trying to figure out what to do with a bunch of firewall specifications right about now. I expected him to chuckle, maybe share his own story about parenting mishaps. Instead, Dr. Adrian Vaughn looked like he'd just seen a ghost rise up from the dead and ask for directions to the nearest Starbucks. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might pass out right there on my office carpet. His hand started trembling, not just a little nervous shake, but full-on earthquake tremors that made me wonder if he was having some kind of medical episode. Then he did something that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. He leaned forward, looked me dead in the eyes with an intensity that could have burned holes through steel, and whispered, "Marcus, listen carefully. Get Oliver. Get to the hospital. Now." I tried to laugh it off, because what else do you do when someone goes from normal conversation to full-blown panic mode over a lunchbox? Come on, Adrian. It's just a lunch mix-up. Kids survive worse than missing their sandwich for one day. But the look in his eyes stopped my attempted humor cold. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't an overreaction. This was pure, concentrated terror. "What?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "What's wrong? What are you seeing that I'm not?" Adrian's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, like he was afraid someone might be listening through the walls. "I can't explain here, Marcus. Not now. Just do exactly what I'm telling you. Get your son and get him to a hospital immediately. Have them run a full blood panel. Tell them you suspect poisoning." The word hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Poisoning. My mind tried to process it, tried to make sense of what he was suggesting, but it felt like trying to solve calculus while someone was screaming in my ear. "That's impossible. You're talking about my wife, Adrian. Clara would never. She loves Oliver like he's her own son." "Marcus." His voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much death, too much tragedy, too many families destroyed by things they never saw coming. "I've been a doctor for 20 years. I know what arsenic residue looks like, and there's enough on that lunchbox to kill a grown man. Your son won't survive if you don't move. Right now." My blood turned to ice. My vision tunneled, and suddenly my comfortable office with its expensive furniture and its view of the city felt like a tomb. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my family, about the woman I'd married and trusted with my son's life, crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and that damn lunchbox and ran. The drive to St. Anne's Medical Center felt like navigating through some twisted nightmare where every red light lasted an eternity and every other driver had apparently decided this was the perfect day to forget how to operate a motor vehicle. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight I thought I might snap it in half, and my mind kept ping-ponging between rational explanations and the growing dread that was eating me alive from the inside out. Maybe Adrian was wrong. Maybe he was having some kind of breakdown. Former trauma surgeons probably see death and danger everywhere, right? Maybe the residue he thought he saw was just leftover superhero sticker adhesive or some random lunch spillage that looked suspicious to someone who'd spent too many years dealing with worst-case scenarios. Hell, maybe this whole thing was just one massive misunderstanding that we'd all laugh about later over beers. But then I remembered the look in his eyes, that absolute certainty that comes from years of medical training and seeing things that normal people never have to see. Adrian Vaughn wasn't the type to panic over nothing. If he said there was arsenic on that lunchbox, then there was arsenic on that lunchbox, which meant someone had been slowly poisoning my son. That I called the school from the car, trying to keep my voice steady while my world imploded. "Hi, this is Marcus Hale, Oliver's dad. I need to pick him up for a family emergency." The secretary, Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd been dealing with elementary school chaos for about 30 years, didn't even question it. "Of course, Mr. Hale. I'll have him ready at the front office." 20 minutes later, I was walking through those familiar school hallways that smelled like disinfectant and childhood dreams, trying to look like a normal dad instead of someone whose entire reality had just been fed through a wood chipper. Oliver was waiting for me with his backpack and that huge grin that could light up a football stadium. "Dad, are we going somewhere cool?" Mrs. Peterson said it was a surprise. He bounced on his toes with that endless energy that 9-year-olds seem to run on, completely oblivious to the fact that his world might be falling apart too. "Something like that, buddy," I managed, ruffling his hair and trying not to think about how pale he'd been looking lately. How he'd been complaining about stomach aches for months. How Clara always dismissed it as growing pains or too much junk food whenever I brought it up, growing pains. Jesus Christ. At the hospital, I had to practically bite my tongue off to keep from screaming at the triage nurse to move faster. St. Anne's was one of those places that tried to disguise the fact that it was essentially a human repair shop by painting everything in cheerful colors and hanging motivational posters everywhere. "Healing begins with hope," one of them proclaimed, right next to a picture of a sunset that probably came from a stock photo website. Oliver thought the whole thing was some kind of adventure. He swung his legs from the examination table, pointing at all the medical equipment like he was touring a space station. "Dad, what's that thing do? Can I push the buttons? Why does everything beep so much?" His curiosity was infectious under normal circumstances, but right now it just made my heart feel like it was being squeezed in a vice.dr. Miriam Lee, head of toxicology, looked like someone who'd seen enough poisoning cases to write a very depressing book about it. She was probably in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and the kind of gentle but direct manner that comes from years of delivering bad news to terrified families. When Adrian pulled her aside and started whispering urgently, I saw her expression shift from professional curiosity to serious concern. "Mr. Hale," she said, turning back to Oliver and me with that carefully controlled voice that medical professionals use when they're trying not to scare the hell out of you. "We're going to need to run some blood work on Oliver. Just routine tests to make sure everything's functioning properly." Oliver perked up. "Blood tests? Like a vampire movie? Cool. If only he knew." Meanwhile, my phone kept buzzing with texts from Clara. "How did your meeting go? Don't forget we need milk and those crackers Oliver likes. Should I start dinner without you?" Normal, everyday wife messages that now felt like they were written in some kind of code I couldn't crack. Was she genuinely clueless about what was happening, or was she sitting at home right now, wondering why her plan hadn't worked yet? The thought made me physically sick. While we waited for the lab results, I tried to keep Oliver entertained and distracted, but my mind kept wandering to all the little things I'd ignored or explained away over the past few months. The stomach aches that seemed to come in waves. The times he'd seemed unusually tired after meals. The way Clara always insisted on packing his lunch herself, never letting me or Oliver help with the preparation. She's so particular about nutrition, I'd always thought. She just wants to make sure he's eating healthy. God, I was an idiot, doctor. Lee returned about an hour later, and I could tell from her expression that Adrian hadn't been wrong. She sat down across from us, her hands folded carefully in her lap, and spoke in that gentle but firm tone that doctors use when they're about to destroy your world. "Mr. Hale, Oliver's blood work shows elevated levels of arsenic, consistent with chronic exposure over an extended period of time. The levels suggest he's been ingesting small amounts regularly for several months." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt my knees wobble, and I had to grab the edge of the examination table to keep from falling over. Oliver was still swinging his legs, completely oblivious to the fact that someone had been slowly murdering him with his daily lunch. How much exposure are we talking about?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Enough to cause the symptoms he's been experiencing, the stomach pain, fatigue, occasional nausea. If it had continued at this rate." She didn't need to finish the sentence. We all knew where this story was heading. "But he's going to be okay, right? I mean, now that we know what it is, you can fix it. Arsenic poisoning is treatable if caught early enough, which thankfully it was. We'll start him on chelation therapy immediately to help his body eliminate the remaining toxins." "But Mr. Hale," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "someone has been deliberately poisoning your son. This wasn't accidental exposure. The dosing pattern suggests someone with knowledge of how to administer arsenic in small, consistent amounts designed to look like natural illness." Oliver looked up from the medical equipment he'd been examining. "Dad, why does everyone look so serious? Am I sick or something?" I knelt down next to the examination table and took his small hands in mine, trying to figure out how to explain to a 9-year-old that someone he trusted had been trying to kill him. "You're going to be fine, buddy. The doctors just need to give you some medicine to make sure you stay healthy, okay?" He nodded solemnly, trusting me completely, and I felt something inside my chest crack wide open. This kid had absolute faith that I would protect him, that I would keep him safe, and I'd failed him in the worst possible way. I'd brought a monster into our home and called her family. As Dr. Lee explained the treatment plan and the steps we'd need to take. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Clara. "Everything okay? You've been gone for hours. Oliver must be starving. I made his favorite cookies for when you get home." His favorite cookies. The same type of cookies they'd found traces of arsenic on from the Lunchbox. My wife. The woman I'd married. The woman I'd trusted with my son's life. The woman who'd held Oliver when he cried and read him bedtime stories and tucked him in every night. Had been slowly, methodically killing him. And she was sitting at home right now, baking more poison. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, watching normal families walk by with their normal problems, and felt like I was observing life through bulletproof glass. A mom was arguing with her teenager about curfew. A dad was chasing his toddler around a minivan while juggling grocery bags. Everyday suburban drama that used to be my world too, before I discovered that my wife was a goddamn sociopath. That MY phone kept buzzing like an angry wasp. Clara again. Marcus, where are you? The school said you picked Oliver up for an emergency, but you're not answering. What's happening? I'm starting to get really worried. Answer me. The messages kept coming, each one more frantic than the last. And I had to admit she was either the world's greatest actress or she genuinely had no idea that her poisoning scheme had been discovered. The scary part? I couldn't tell which scenario was worse. Adrian had given me his number before I left the hospital, along with strict instructions to keep Oliver there overnight for observation and the start of his treatment. Don't take him home, Marcus. Not until we figure out what we're dealing with. Smart advice, considering home was apparently where my son had been getting his daily dose of arsenic with his Cheerios that I called Adrian from the parking lot, my hands still shaking like I'd been mainlining espresso for the past 6 hours. The blood work confirmed it. I said when he picked up. Dr. Lee says Oliver's been getting small, consistent doses for months. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I'm sorry, Marcus. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. How long do you think this has been going on? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer and really didn't want it confirmed. Based on the levels in his system, I'd say at least 4 to 6 months of regular exposure. Maybe longer if they started with smaller amounts and gradually increased the dosage. 4 to 6 months. That timeline hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. 6 months ago was when Clara had suddenly become obsessed with family planning and insisted we increase Oliver's life insurance policy. Just in case something happens, she'd said. Kids are so accident-prone, and with your job keeping you away so much, I want to make sure he's protected. I thought it was sweet. Responsible. The kind of thing a caring stepmother would think about. Jesus, I was naive. Adrian, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Clara mentioned that her first husband died of a sudden heart attack when he was only 34. Is there any way to tell if he was poisoned too? Adrian finished. Arsenic can cause cardiac episodes, especially with long-term exposure. If someone knew what they were doing, they could make it look like natural causes pretty easily. The pieces were falling into place with the kind of sick precision that made me want to punch something. Clara's first husband, David, had been a successful real estate developer. Plenty of money, good life insurance, no kids to complicate the inheritance. Then he drops dead of a heart attack at 34, leaving Clara a very wealthy widow. Fast forward a couple years, and she meets me, another successful guy with a kid and a comfortable bank account. We fall in love, get married, and suddenly she's got access to Oliver's trust fund and life insurance policy. All she has to do is wait for the grieving period to pass and then start her little science experiment that I called Detective Ryan Keller, an old buddy from my military days who'd ended up in law enforcement after we both got out of the service. Ryan had seen enough domestic cases to know how these things usually played out, and his advice was exactly what I expected but didn't want to hear. Marcus, I believe you, but believing you and proving it in court are two completely different animals. You need evidence. Real evidence. Video footage, documented chain of custody, clear motive. Right now, all you've got is suspicious circumstances and a lot of what-ifs. So what am I supposed to do? Just wait for her to finish the job? No, you document everything. You set up surveillance. You catch her in the act. And you do it all legally, because if you screw this up procedurally, she walks free and probably disappears with whatever money she can grab. That night was the hardest performance of my life. I walked into my house, the house that Clara and I had picked out together, the house where we'd planned to build our future, and acted like everything was normal. Clara rushed to me the moment I opened the door, tears in her eyes, demanding to know where Oliver was and why I wasn't answering my phone. He's fine, I told her, forcing myself to hug her back when every instinct I had was screaming to get as far away from her as possible. Just some vitamin deficiency issues. The doctor wants to keep him overnight for observation and start him on some supplements. Vitamin deficiency? But I've been so careful about his nutrition. She pulled back to look at me, and for just a second, I thought I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Relief? Disappointment? I couldn't tell, and that uncertainty was eating me alive. We went through the motions of a normal evening. Dinner together, watching TV on the couch. Clara curled up against me like we were still the happy couple we'd been that morning. She even cried a little, worried about Oliver being alone in the hospital. If I hadn't known what I knew, I would have thought she was the perfect concerned stepmother. Instead, I lay awake all night next to a woman who'd been slowly murdering my son, listening to her breathe and wondering how many other people she'd killed. When she finally fell asleep, I snuck out to my home office and spent the rest of the night setting up a surveillance system that would make the NSA jealous. Cameras in the kitchen. Cameras in Oliver's room. Audio recording devices in every common area. If Clara so much as sneezed suspiciously, I was going to have it documented in high definition. Ryan was right. I needed evidence that would hold up in court, evidence that would put her away for the rest of her miserable life. The next morning, Clara was back to her usual routine, humming while she made breakfast and asking about when Oliver would be coming home. She offered to pack me a lunch, which made my skin crawl, and suggested she could bake some cookies to take to him at the hospital. The doctor said no outside food for now. I lied, watching her face carefully for any reaction. Something about controlling his diet while they figure out the vitamin issues. For just a split second, so brief I almost missed it, her smile faltered. Just a tiny crack in the perfect wife facade, but it was enough to confirm what I already knew. Clara wasn't just a killer. She was a patient, methodical killer who'd been playing the long game with my son's life, and now it was my turn to play. The next morning felt like I was starring in some twisted reality show where the goal was to act normal while your world burned down around you. Clara bounced around the kitchen like she was auditioning for a cereal commercial, all sunshine smiles and domestic goddess energy. She hummed some pop song I didn't recognize while scrambling eggs, asked if I wanted orange juice or coffee, and generally behaved like the perfect wife who definitely wasn't a cold-blooded killer. I was thinking, she said, flipping eggs with the kind of practiced ease that comes from months of routine. Maybe I could bake those chocolate chip cookies Oliver loves so much. You know, for when he comes home from the hospital. I bet he's missing his favorite treats. My blood turned to ice water. Those chocolate chip cookies, the same type they'd found arsenic residue on from the lunchbox. She was already planning her next move, already thinking about how to continue poisoning my son the moment he walked back through our front door. The doctor said no homemade food for a while. I managed, trying to keep my voice level while every instinct I had screamed to grab her by the throat and demand answers. Something about controlling his diet until they figure out what's causing the vitamin deficiency. Clara's face fell into this picture-perfect expression of maternal disappointment. Oh, that's such a shame. I know how much those cookies mean to him. She paused, spatula in hand, looking genuinely troubled. Poor little guy must be so confused, stuck in that sterile hospital room. I should visit him today, bring some books or games to cheer him up. The casual way she suggested visiting Oliver, the kid she'd been systematically poisoning for months, made me want to vomit. But I just nodded and said something about how that would be nice, while mentally adding, over my dead body, to the end of the sentence, after Clara left for her part-time job at the local art gallery. Because of course the murderous sociopath had a charming, creative career that made everyone think she was just the sweetest thing, I called Adrian and asked him to meet me at my office. We needed to review the surveillance footage, and I needed someone with medical expertise to help me understand what we were looking at. Adrian showed up 20 minutes later with coffee and the kind of grim expression that told me he'd been thinking about this case all night too. We settled into my conference room, pulled up the camera feeds on my laptop, and started our crash course in How to Catch Your Wife Committing Murder 101. The first few hours of footage were exactly what you'd expect from hidden cameras in a suburban house. Clara getting ready for work, checking her phone, doing normal wife things that would have been boring as hell under different circumstances. But then we got to the part where she went into Oliver's room. On screen, Clara stood in the doorway for a long moment, just staring at Oliver's empty bed. Then she walked over to his desk, where he kept his collection of toy cars and action figures, and started moving things around. Not cleaning or organizing, just examining everything. Like she was taking inventory of what she'd have to deal with after he was gone. Look at her face, Adrian said quietly, pointing at the screen. That's not grief or worry. That's calculation. He was right. Clara's expression was completely different from the concerned stepmother act she'd been performing for me. Her face was cold, analytical, almost businesslike as she surveyed Oliver's possessions. This wasn't a woman missing a sick child. This was someone mentally cataloging assets. Then she did something that made my stomach drop through the floor. She went to my home office, sat down at my computer, and started typing. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but I could see enough of the screen to tell she was researching something online. Fast, focused typing like someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. "Can you enhance that?" I asked Adrienne, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know what she'd been searching for. "Not really, but we can check your browser history later. If she didn't clear it, we'll know exactly what she was researching." That evening, Detective Ryan Keller called with some information that confirmed my worst fears, and then made them about 10 times worse. "I did some digging on your wife's background," he said without preamble. "Her maiden name is Claudine Mercer, not Clara Morrison like she told you. And here's the fun part. Claudine Mercer has been married 3 times, not twice. 3 times. Husband number 1, James Patterson, died of a sudden heart attack at age 31. Husband number 2, Michael Torres, died of what looked like a drug overdose at 35, except he'd never used drugs in his life. And then there's David Morrison, husband number 3, who you already know about. 3 dead husbands. 3 sudden deaths of healthy men in their 30s. The pattern was so obvious it was practically screaming at us, but somehow she'd managed to fly under the radar for years. There's more, Ryan continued. I ran her social security number through the system. Claudine Mercer has been flagged by insurance companies in 2 different states for suspicious claims. Nothing they could prove, but enough red flags to make them nervous. Your wife, Marcus, is a professional. A professional. That explained the careful dosing, the patience, the way she'd managed to make Oliver's symptoms look like normal childhood complaints. This wasn't some crime of passion or domestic dispute gone wrong. This was a calculated business operation with my son as the target. When Clara came home that evening, I was waiting in the living room with a glass of wine and what I hoped looked like a normal husband's smile. She kissed me hello, asked about my day, and settled in next to me on the couch, like we were still the happy couple we'd been 72 hours ago. "How's Oliver doing?" she asked, stroking my arm with those manicured fingers that had been measuring out poison doses. I called the hospital, but they said only immediate family could get updates. "He's doing better. Should be home in a day or 2. I watched her face carefully, looking for any reaction. "Dr. Lee thinks the vitamin supplements are already helping." Clara smiled that perfect wife smile. "That's wonderful news. I've been so worried about him." Worried about him. The woman who'd been slowly killing my son was worried about him. That night, I checked my browser history after Clara went to sleep. What I found made my blood run cold. She'd been researching children's grief counseling services, single father support groups, and, most chilling of all, the average processing time for life insurance claims involving minor children. She wasn't just planning to kill Oliver. She was already preparing for the aftermath, figuring out how to comfort me through my tragic loss, and help me navigate the practical details of collecting on my dead son's insurance policy. The next morning brought a breakthrough that would have been funny if it wasn't so horrifying. Detective Keller called while Clara was in the shower, his voice tight with excitement. "Marcus, we got her. Not for the murders, not yet, but we've got her on fraud charges that'll stick. Turns out Claudine Mercer is wanted in Nevada for insurance fraud, and the statute of limitations hasn't run out. We can arrest her today if you want." "What about Oliver? What about building a case for the poisoning?" "We'll get there, but this gives us leverage. Once we have her in custody, we can search the house, analyze everything in that kitchen, and build the attempted murder case properly." "But Marcus," his voice got serious. "We need to catch her in the act if we want this to stick. Can you handle being bait?" "Bait?" "Using myself and Oliver as bait to catch a woman who'd already killed 3 men and was working on victim number 4. "Yeah," I said, watching Clara through the bathroom door as she did her hair, preparing for another day of playing the perfect wife. "I can handle it. Time to see just how good an actress Claudine Mercer really was. Setting a trap for someone who's been systematically murdering people for years isn't exactly covered in your typical How to Be a Good Husband manual. But after 3 sleepless nights of watching surveillance footage and discovering that my wife was basically the suburban version of a Black Widow spider, I was ready to get creative with my approach to marital problem solving. The plan Ryan and I had cooked up was simple in theory, but terrifying in practice. We needed to catch Clara in the act of attempting to poison either Oliver or me, with enough evidence to make the charges stick in court. That meant giving her both the opportunity and the motivation to try again, which basically translated to using my family as bait in the world's most fucked up fishing expedition. You sure you can handle this? Ryan asked during our morning strategy session at a coffee shop across town from my office. Because once we set this in motion, there's no backing out. She's going to try to kill you or Oliver, and we need to let her get close enough to actually attempt it before we can move in. I can handle it, I said, though my hands were shaking enough to make my coffee cup rattle against the table. Just tell me what you need me to do. The first step was creating the right motivation. Clara wasn't killing for passion or revenge. She was killing for money. So we needed to make her think that the financial landscape was about to change in a way that threatened her plans. That evening, I came home with a story about updating my will. I had an interesting conversation with Gerald Price today, I told Clara over dinner, referring to my attorney. He suggested I make some changes to my estate planning, especially considering Oliver's health issues. Clara looked up from her salad, fork paused halfway to her mouth. What kind of changes? Well, if something happens to Oliver, God forbid, Gerald thinks it would be better to establish a charitable foundation in his memory rather than just leaving everything to family. You know, help other kids with health problems, that sort of thing. I watched her face carefully as I delivered this particular piece of fiction. For just a second, her perfect wife mask slipped, and I saw something cold and calculating flash behind her eyes. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. That's very thoughtful of you, she said, her voice just a little too controlled. Though I hope we never have to worry about anything like that. Oliver's going to be fine. Of course he is, I agreed, while mentally adding, because I'm going to make damn sure you never get another chance to hurt him. The next morning, Clara was back to her usual routine, but there was something different about her energy. She moved through the kitchen with more purpose, more focus, like someone who'd made a decision and was ready to act on it. When she offered to pack me a thermos of homemade soup for Oliver, every alarm bell in my head started ringing at maximum volume. That's sweet of you, I said, accepting the thermos with hands that I hoped weren't visibly shaking. I'm sure he'll appreciate having something from home. Clara smiled that perfect stepmother smile. I made it extra hearty. Growing boys need their nutrition, especially when they're recovering. Recovering, right. From the poison she'd been feeding him for months, I took the thermos straight to the hospital, where Dr. Lee was waiting with a testing kit that could analyze the contents for toxins. Adrian had called ahead to prepare her, so she knew exactly what we were dealing with and why we needed fast results. Give me 20 minutes, she said, disappearing into the lab with Clara's nutritious soup. Those 20 minutes felt like 20 years. I sat in the hospital cafeteria, staring at my phone and trying to look like a normal worried father instead of someone whose wife had just tried to murder him with lunch. Oliver was upstairs, getting stronger every day as the chelation therapy cleared the arsenic from his system, completely unaware that his stepmother was downstairs trying to finish what she'd started. When Dr. Lee came back, her expression told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. Arsenic, she said quietly. Enough to kill an adult male within hours. If you'd actually consumed this. She didn't need to finish the sentence. That MY phone was already in my hand, dialing Ryan's number. We got her, I said when he picked up. The soup's loaded with arsenic. How fast can you move? We're already in position. Just give us the word. But first, we needed Clara to think her plan had worked. I called her from the hospital, my voice carefully modulated to sound panicked and grief-stricken. Clara, you need to come to the hospital right now. Something's happened with Oliver. What? What's wrong? Is he okay? Just get here as fast as you can. Room 314. I could hear her moving around on the other end of the line, probably grabbing her keys and her purse, maybe checking her appearance in the mirror one last time before heading off to play the grieving stepmother role. The thought made me sick, but it also filled me with a savage satisfaction. She thought she was coming to collect on her investment. Instead, she was walking straight into the trap we'd set for her. 30 minutes later, Clara came rushing through the hospital corridors, her face a perfect mask of maternal panic and concern. She found me standing outside Oliver's room, and I have to admit, her performance was Oscar-worthy. Tears in her eyes, hands shaking. The whole devastated stepmother act played to perfection. "Marcus, what happened? Is Oliver okay?" "The nurses won't tell me anything. He's stable," I said, letting my voice crack just a little. "But Clara, the doctors found something. Something that changes everything." That's when Detective Keller stepped out from around the corner, badge in hand, along with two uniformed officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Mrs. Hale," Ryan said, his voice professionally calm, "I'm Detective Keller with the city police. I need to ask you some questions about your stepson's condition." Clara's face went through a series of micro-expressions. Confusion, fear, calculation, before settling on confused innocence. "I don't understand. What's this about? What kind of questions?" "We have reason to believe that Oliver has been the victim of deliberate poisoning," Ryan continued, watching her reaction carefully. "Specifically, arsenic poisoning administered over a period of several months." The color drained from Clara's face, but she held on to her innocent act like a lifeline. "Poisoning? That's impossible. Who would do such a thing? Are you sure the tests are accurate?" "We're very sure," I said, stepping closer to her. "We're also sure about the arsenic in the soup you made me this morning." For the first time since I'd known her, Clara's mask completely slipped. The caring stepmother disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating that looked at me with pure, undiluted hatred. "You bastard," she whispered. "You set me up." Ryan stepped forward with the handcuffs. "Claudine Mercer, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Oliver Hale and Marcus Hale." As the cuffs clicked into place, Claudine, looked at me with eyes like broken glass. "You think this is over? You think Oliver's safe now? I have friends, Marcus. People who don't like loose ends." The threat hit me like a physical blow, but I managed to keep my voice steady. "The only thing that's over is your ability to hurt my son." As they led her away, I could hear her shouting threats and promises of revenge that echoed through the hospital corridors like something out of a nightmare. But for the first time in days, I could breathe again. Oliver was safe. The monster was in custody at least, that's what I thought. Clara arrived at St. Anne's Medical Center looking like she'd been through a blender set on emotional breakdown. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared from what appeared to be genuine tears, and she was wearing mismatched clothes like she'd thrown on whatever was closest to the door. If I didn't know what I knew, I would have thought she was just another panicked parent rushing to their child's bedside. The performance was so convincing it almost made me doubt myself for a split second. Almost. She spotted me standing in the hallway outside Oliver's room and practically threw herself into my arms, sobbing against my chest with the kind of raw desperation that would have fooled anyone who wasn't aware she was a stone-cold killer. "Marcus, thank God you're okay," she gasped between sobs. "When you called and said something had happened to Oliver, I thought I was going to lose both of you. Both of us. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so sick." "Where is he?" she demanded, pulling back to look at me with red-rimmed eyes that actually had real tears in them. "Is he okay? What happened?" The nurse at the desk wouldn't tell me anything, just said to wait here. That's when Detective Keller stepped out from the family consultation room, where he'd been waiting with two uniformed officers. Clara's face went from maternal panic to confused wariness in about half a second. "Mrs. Hale," Ryan said, his voice carrying that particular tone cops use when they're about to ruin someone's day, "I'm Detective Keller with the Metropolitan Police. I need to speak with you about your stepson's medical condition." Clara looked back and forth between Ryan and me, and I could practically see the wheels turning behind her eyes as she tried to figure out what was happening. "I don't understand. Is this about Oliver? Is there some kind of legal issue with his treatment?" "You could say that," Ryan replied. "Mrs. Hale, we have reason to believe that Oliver has been the victim of deliberate poisoning over an extended period of time. Specifically, arsenic poisoning." The word arsenic hit Clara like a physical blow. She actually took a step backward, her hand flying to her throat in what would have been a convincing display of shock if I hadn't known better. "Poisoning," she whispered. That's impossible. Who would do such a thing to a child? Are you absolutely certain about this?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. She was good, really good, at this whole innocent victim routine. If I hadn't seen the surveillance footage of her cold, calculating expression while she researched my son's insurance policy, I might have fallen for it myself. We're very certain, I said, stepping closer to her. Just like we're certain about what was in that thermos of soup you made for me this morning. Clara's eyes went wide, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw something that looked like genuine fear flicker across her face. The soup? Marcus, what are you talking about? I made that for Oliver because I thought he might be getting tired of hospital food. Funny thing about that soup, Dr. Lee said, appearing at my shoulder like she'd been waiting for her cue. When we tested it, we found enough arsenic to kill a grown man within hours. Interesting choice of ingredients for a sick child. That's when Clara's carefully constructed facade finally started to crack. She looked around at all of us, Ryan, Dr. Lee, the uniformed officers, me, and I could see her mind racing, trying to find a way out of the trap that was closing around her. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. There must be some kind of mistake. Maybe the soup was contaminated somehow, or maybe someone tampered with it after I made it. I would never hurt Oliver. I love him like he's my own son. Cut the shit, Claudine, Ryan said, pulling out a folder thick with documentation. Yeah, that's right. We know who you really are. Claudine Mercer, wanted in Nevada for insurance fraud. 3 dead husbands. All of them healthy men who died suddenly and mysteriously. You want to keep playing the innocent stepmother, or do you want to make this easier on yourself? The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The sobbing, panicked wife disappeared completely, replaced by something cold and predatory that looked at all of us like we were obstacles to be eliminated. Claudine, straightened her shoulders, wiped the tears from her eyes, and smiled with all the warmth of a shark. Well, she said, her voice now completely steady and devoid of emotion. I suppose the charade is over. It was like watching someone remove a mask, except the mask had been her entire personality. The woman I'd married, the woman who'd read Oliver bedtime stories and made pancakes on Sunday mornings, had never existed. She'd been a carefully crafted character designed to get close to my son and my bank account. You want to know the funny part? Claudine continued, apparently deciding that if she was going down, she might as well enjoy the moment. Oliver actually liked the cookies. He always asked for seconds, never suspected a thing. These are the best cookies ever, Clara, he'd say. Sweet kid. Too bad he won't be around to enjoy many more of them. The casual cruelty in her voice made me want to wrap my hands around her throat, but Ryan caught my arm before I could move. Easy, Marcus. Don't give her the satisfaction. Claudine laughed, a sound like broken glass scraping against concrete. Oh, Marcus is much too civilized for violence. That's why this was so easy. You trusted me completely, didn't you? Let me into your home, into your family, into your bed. Gave me access to everything I needed to destroy you piece by piece. What? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. Why Oliver? He's just a kid. Because kids have the best life insurance policies, she said matter-of-factly. And because grieving widowers make terrible financial decisions. You would have been so grateful for my support, so dependent on my help getting through the loss. Within a year, maybe 2, you would have signed over everything to me without even thinking about it. The plan was so coldly calculated, so methodically cruel, that it took my breath away. She hadn't just been trying to kill Oliver. She'd been planning to psychologically destroy me in the aftermath, to use my grief as a weapon against my own judgment. James Patterson thought he was getting a devoted wife too, Ryan said, consulting his file. So did Michael Torres and David Morrison. Funny how all your husbands seem to have these sudden medical emergencies right around the 2-year mark. Claudine shrugged. 2 years is about how long it takes to get access to everything you need and establish the right patterns. Any shorter, and people get suspicious. Any longer, and you start getting attached, which is bad for business. Bad for business. She was talking about murdering people like it was a career path. Ryan stepped forward with the handcuffs. Claudine Mercer, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Oliver Hale and Marcus Hale, conspiracy to commit fraud, and about 6 other charges that we'll figure out once we get you downtown. As the cuffs clicked into place, Claudine looked directly at me with eyes that held no trace of humanity. You think you've won something here, Marcus? You think Oliver's safe now just because you caught me? I think you're going to prison for the rest of your miserable life, I said. She smiled that predatory shark smile again. I have friends, Marcus. People who don't like loose ends. People who don't appreciate having their business arrangements interrupted. Oliver may have survived me, but there are others who might not be so patient with their methods. The threat hit me like ice water in my veins, but before I could respond, the officers were leading her away. Her voice echoed down the hospital corridor as she continued shouting threats and promises of revenge that sounded like something out of a horror movie. This isn't over. You have no idea what you've started. They'll come for both of you. As her voice faded into the distance, I stood in the hospital hallway feeling like I'd just survived a car crash. Oliver was safe, Claudine was in custody, but her final words kept echoing in my head that I have friends. What the hell had I gotten us into? 3 days after Claudine's arrest, I was sitting in my living room trying to pretend that life could go back to normal, when Adrian showed up at my door with a file folder that looked thick enough to choke a horse and an expression that told me my nightmare was just getting started. Oliver was upstairs in his room, finally home from the hospital, and slowly getting his color back as the chelation therapy did its work. He'd been asking questions about why Clara wasn't around anymore, and I'd been giving him carefully sanitized answers about how sometimes adults make bad choices and have to go away for a while. The kid was resilient, but I could see the confusion in his eyes every time he looked at the empty spot where his stepmother used to sit at the breakfast table. "We need to talk," Adrian said without preamble, settling into my kitchen with the file folder and 2 cups of coffee that I suspected we were both going to need. "Ryan asked me to share some information with you, off the record. Information that's going to make you really unhappy. Unhappier than discovering my wife was slowly murdering my son." I asked, though I had a sinking feeling that the answer was going to be yes. Adrian opened the folder and spread out what looked like surveillance photos, financial records, and police reports from multiple jurisdictions. Claudine wasn't working alone, Marcus. She's part of something bigger. Much bigger. The first photo showed Claudine sitting in what looked like a coffee shop, deep in conversation with a woman I didn't recognize. Brunette, maybe 50 years old, wearing the kind of expensive clothes that suggested serious money. The second photo showed the same woman meeting with a different younger woman outside what appeared to be a law office. "Margaret Doyle," Adrian said, pointing to the brunette. "Former insurance adjuster, fired for falsifying claims about 15 years ago. Since then, she's been running what law enforcement is calling a Black Widow network." A Black Widow network. The phrase made my blood run cold, but it also explained so much about how professional Claudine's operation had been. "It works like this," Adrian continued, pulling out what looked like an organizational chart. "Doyle recruits women with the right psychological profile, attractive, intelligent, sociopathic enough to kill for money, but disciplined enough to be patient about it. She trains them, gives them new identities, and deploys them to target wealthy men with assets worth taking." The chart looked like something out of a corporate presentation, except instead of sales territories and profit margins, it was mapping out murder operations across multiple states. Names, target profiles, estimated timelines for completion of objectives. It was horrifying and fascinating in equal measure. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Best estimates say about 12 years. Maybe longer. The network has been responsible for at least 15 confirmed deaths, possibly more. The victims are always wealthy men, usually with children from previous marriages who complicate inheritance issues." That explained why Claudine had been so focused on Oliver's life insurance and trust fund. It wasn't just about getting my money. It was about eliminating any complications that might interfere with a clean financial inheritance. Adrian flipped to another section of the file, showing financial records that made my head spin. "The operation is surprisingly sophisticated. They've got a chemist who provides untraceable poisons, a forger who creates new identities, even a few corrupt officials who help smooth over any awkward questions about sudden deaths. Dr. Felix Braun," he said, pointing to a photo of a thin, nervous-looking man in his 60s. Former pharmaceutical researcher, lost his license for conducting unauthorized human trials. Now he makes custom toxins for Doyle's network. The arsenic that was used on Oliver came from his lab. The idea that there was an entire underground operation dedicated to this kind of systematic murder made me feel sick. It wasn't just random violence or crimes of passion. It was organized, methodical, businesslike in its efficiency. And this woman, Adrian continued, showing me a photo of someone who looked like a librarian, Harriet Beck. Expert forger, specializes in creating bulletproof false identities. She's the one who turned Claudine Mercer into Clara Morrison. So there are more of them out there, I said, and it wasn't really a question. More women like Claudine, targeting other families. At least 6 that we know of, probably more. The network operates cells across multiple states: Nevada, California, Arizona, Texas, Florida. Wherever there are wealthy men with assets worth stealing. Adrian pulled out another set of photos that made my stomach drop through the floor. This is what really concerns law enforcement, Marcus. These are recent surveillance photos taken near your neighborhood. The network knows that Claudine was arrested, and they're not happy about it. The photos showed various people, men and women, sitting in cars, walking past my house, lingering in the coffee shop where I usually grab my morning caffeine fix. Professional surveillance, the kind that suggested serious resources and planning. They're watching us, I said, stating the obvious because my brain was still trying to process the implications. They're evaluating you as a threat, Adrian corrected. Claudine was one of their most successful operatives. Her arrest represents a significant financial loss to the network, not to mention the risk that she might cooperate with law enforcement to reduce her sentence. Is she cooperating? So far, no. Claudine's keeping her mouth shut, probably because she knows what happens to people who betray Margaret Doyle. But the network doesn't know that she'll stay quiet, which makes you and Oliver potential liabilities. The threat was clear enough. As long as I existed as a witness to Claudine's crimes, as long as Oliver survived as evidence of her attempted murder, we represented a danger to the entire operation. Dead witnesses couldn't testify. Dead victims couldn't contradict carefully constructed stories about tragic accidents. What does law enforcement plan to do about this? I asked, though I had a feeling I wasn't going to like the answer. They're building a case, but it's going to take time. Months, maybe years to gather enough evidence to take down the entire network. In the meantime, Adrian spread his hands in a gesture that basically said, "You're on your own." I thought about Oliver upstairs, playing with his action figures, and slowly recovering from months of systematic poisoning. I thought about the people in those surveillance photos, professional killers who viewed my family as a business problem that needed to be solved. I thought about spending the next few years looking over my shoulder, never knowing if today was the day they decided we were too much of a risk to let live. There is another option, Adrian said quietly, like he was reading my mind. I know someone. Someone who specializes in handling problems like this when official channels aren't fast enough. What kind of someone? The kind who makes problems disappear permanently. Logan Pierce. Adrian didn't say the name, but I knew who he was talking about. Military contractor, former special operations, the kind of guy who handled situations that regular law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't touch. We'd served together years ago, back when we were young and stupid, and thought we could save the world one mission at a time. You're talking about going outside the law, I said. I'm talking about protecting your son, Adrian replied. The network has been operating for over a decade, Marcus. They're good at what they do, and they're patient. Do you really want to bet Oliver's life on the hope that law enforcement will move fast enough? I looked at the surveillance photos again, at the faces of people who were probably planning the most efficient way to eliminate my family. Then I thought about Oliver's laugh. About the way he still asked me to check for monsters under his bed, about how he'd never again feel completely safe in his own home as long as these people existed. Make the call, I said. Logan Pierce looked exactly like what you'd expect from someone who'd spent 15 years making problems disappear in places that didn't officially exist on any government maps. Weathered face, gray eyes that had seen too much, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're probably the most dangerous person in any room you walk into. When he showed up at my house 3 days after Adrian made the call, he was carrying a duffel bag that I really didn't want to know the contents of and wearing an expression that suggested this was just another Tuesday for him. "Marcus," he said, settling into my kitchen like we were old buddies catching up instead of planning what was essentially a small-scale war. "Adrian, fill me in on your situation. Sorry to hear about your wife trying to murder your kid. That's fucked up, even by my standards. Oliver was at school, which was probably for the best. Some conversations aren't meant for 9-year-old ears, especially when they involve discussions about the most efficient ways to eliminate multiple targets across several states. Logan, I need to know what we're looking at here, I said, pouring him coffee and trying to pretend my hands weren't shaking. How many people are we talking about? What kind of resources do they have? Logan pulled out a tablet and started scrolling through what looked like intelligence reports. Margaret Doyle's network consists of approximately 12 active operatives, plus support staff. The core leadership is Doyle herself, Dr. Felix Braun the chemist, and Harriet Beck the forger. They've got safe houses in Nevada, Arizona, and California, plus a compound outside Las Vegas that serves as their main base of operations. He showed me satellite photos of what looked like a luxury ranch complex in the middle of nowhere. Multiple buildings, high fences, the kind of security setup that suggested serious paranoia about uninvited guests. Here's the good news, Logan continued. They're criminals, not soldiers. Most of them have never been in a real fight in their lives. They rely on stealth, patience, and the fact that nobody suspects nice ladies of being cold-blooded killers. And the bad news. They've got money, resources, and about 12 years of experience staying under law enforcement's radar. Plus, they're already mobilizing to deal with what they see as the Claudine problem. My sources say they're planning to extract her during a prison transfer next week. A prison break. Of course, because apparently my life had officially become an action movie, complete with criminal conspiracies and elaborate rescue operations. They can't let her talk, Logan explained. Claudine knows too much about the operation, including the identities and locations of other operatives. If she decides to cooperate with law enforcement to reduce her sentence, the entire network falls apart. So they'll kill her to keep her quiet. Maybe. Or maybe they'll extract her and relocate her somewhere outside U.S. jurisdiction. Either way, they can't afford to leave loose ends, which means you and Oliver are still targets. Logan pulled up another set of files, showing surveillance photos and background reports on various network operatives. But here's where it gets interesting. While they're focused on the Claudine situation, they're vulnerable. Most of their resources are being diverted to Nevada for the extraction operation, which means their other cells are running with skeleton crews. I studied the photos, trying to wrap my head around the fact that these ordinary-looking women were professional murderers. Suburban soccer moms with perfect smiles and carefully crafted identities, each one probably in the middle of slowly killing some unsuspecting husband while playing the devoted wife role. What are you proposing? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer and wasn't entirely comfortable with it. We hit them while they're distracted, Logan said simply. Take out the active operatives, destroy their infrastructure, and eliminate the leadership before they can regroup. Clean, efficient, permanent solution to your problem. The word eliminate hung in the air like a loaded gun. We were talking about killing people, multiple people, in what amounted to a coordinated assassination campaign. Part of me recoiled from the idea, but a larger part thought about Oliver sleeping peacefully upstairs, finally safe from the woman who'd been slowly poisoning him for months. How many people are we talking about? I asked. 6 active operatives currently deployed, plus the 3 leadership targets. Maybe a few support staff, depending on who's at the compound when we hit it. 9 people minimum. 9 lives that would end because they'd chosen to make a living by murdering families like mine. I thought about Claudine's cold smile when she talked about Oliver asking for seconds of her poisoned cookies, and any moral qualms I might have had evaporated like smoke. What do you need from me? Logan smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Funding mostly. This kind of operation isn't cheap, and I'm guessing you're motivated enough to pay for quality work. He was right about that. After months of watching my son suffer from mysterious stomach aches while his loving stepmother slowly killed him, I was motivated enough to liquidate my entire savings account if that's what it took to keep him safe. How long will it take? 2 weeks, maybe 3. The operatives in Dallas, Phoenix, and Miami will go first, quick, clean, made to look like accidents or random crime. Then we hit the compound in Nevada during their extraction operation. Maximum chaos, minimum survivors. Logan stood up, shouldering his duffel bag with the casual ease of someone who'd done this kind of thing more times than he could count. One thing you need to understand, Marcus. Once we start this, there's no going back. These people will be dead, and law enforcement will probably never figure out exactly what happened to them. You okay with that? I thought about Oliver's trust fund, about the life insurance policies Claudine had been so eager to update, about the surveillance photos of people watching my house and planning God knows what kind of revenge for disrupting their business model. Yeah, I said, I'm okay with that. Good. I'll be in touch when it's done. After Logan left, I sat in my kitchen staring at my coffee and trying to process what I'd just set in motion. In 2 weeks, 9 people would be dead because I decided that my son's safety was more important than their lives. It should have bothered me more than it did. Instead, all I felt was a cold satisfaction that justice was finally going to be served, even if it wasn't the kind that happened in courtrooms. When Oliver came home from school that afternoon, chattering about his math test and asking if we could have pizza for dinner, I hugged him a little tighter than usual. Dad, you're squishing me, he complained, but he didn't try to pull away. Sorry, buddy. Just happy you're home. In 2 weeks, the people who'd threatened my family would be gone forever, and I'd sleep better than I had in months. The courtroom smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams, which seemed pretty appropriate for the day Claudine Mercer was finally going to pay for what she'd done to my family. I sat in the gallery wearing my best suit and trying to look like a respectable citizen seeking justice instead of someone who'd recently bankrolled a multi-state assassination campaign. Oliver was at school. Thankfully, some things a kid doesn't need to see, especially when one of those things involves watching his former stepmother get sentenced to spend the rest of her miserable life in prison. It had been 6 months since Logan and his team had systematically dismantled Margaret Doyle's network with the kind of surgical precision that would have impressed the Pentagon. The official reports listed the deaths as a series of unrelated accidents and random crimes. A gas leak explosion in Dallas, a home invasion gone wrong in Phoenix, a tragic hiking accident in the mountains outside Las Vegas. Law enforcement had their suspicions, but suspicions don't hold up in court, and frankly, nobody seemed particularly motivated to investigate too deeply into the deaths of a bunch of professional killers. The compound raid had been Logan's masterpiece. Doyle and her remaining operatives had been in the middle of planning Claudine's extraction when a rival drug cartel had apparently decided to settle some territorial dispute with extreme prejudice. The ensuing firefight had left the entire leadership dead and the compound burned to the ground, along with most of the evidence of their 12-year murder spree. Tragic loss of life, the local sheriff had told reporters with a perfectly straight face. These drug organizations are becoming increasingly violent in their business dealings. Nobody bothered to mention that the supposed cartel members had vanished like smoke, or that the attack had been carried out with military precision by people who clearly knew exactly what they were doing. Sometimes justice comes from unexpected directions, and sometimes the good guys wear black instead of white hats. With the network destroyed and most of the evidence going up in flames, the prosecution had to build their case against Claudine using what they could prove: the attempted poisoning of Oliver and me, plus the financial fraud charges from Nevada. It wasn't everything she deserved, but it was enough to put her away forever, which was really all that mattered to me. Claudine sat at the defendant's table wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with her complexion, her perfectly styled hair now showing gray roots, and her manicured nails bitten down to the quick. 6 months in county lockup had not been kind to the woman who used to spend an hour every morning making herself look like the perfect suburban wife. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, like a deflated balloon that had lost all its dangerous charm. When she turned to scan the gallery, her eyes found mine and held them for a long moment. There was no longer any pretense of innocence or victimhood in her expression, just pure, concentrated hatred for the man who destroyed her carefully constructed life. I stared right back, thinking about Oliver's laugh and the way he'd started sleeping through the night again once she was gone. Judge Patricia Hendricks was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd been dealing with criminals for long enough to develop a healthy skepticism about sob stories and claims of innocence. She listened to Claudine's lawyer make his pitch for leniency, mental illness, history of abuse, remorse for her actions, with the kind of expression that suggested she'd heard it all before and wasn't particularly impressed. Your Honor, the defense attorney continued, my client was clearly suffering from severe psychological trauma that impaired her judgment. She's expressed genuine remorse for her actions, and is committed to seeking treatment for her underlying mental health issues. Genuine remorse. Right. The woman who'd smiled while describing how much Oliver enjoyed her poisoned cookies was suddenly overcome with regret about her life choices. District Attorney Sarah Chin stood up to deliver the prosecution's response, and her opening words cut through the courtroom like a scalpel. Your Honor, the defendant engaged in a calculated, systematic attempt to murder a 9-year-old child over a period of several months. This was not a crime of passion or the result of diminished capacity. This was cold-blooded, premeditated murder for financial gain. Chin had done her homework. She laid out the timeline of Oliver's illness, the evidence of arsenic in his system, the insurance policy changes, and the pattern of suspicious deaths surrounding Claudine's previous marriages. By the time she was finished, even Claudine's lawyer looked like he wanted to distance himself from his client. The defendant showed no mercy to a helpless child. Chin concluded. She deserves none from this court. When Judge Hendricks asked if Claudine wanted to make a statement before sentencing, I half expected her to maintain the innocent victim act right up to the end. Instead, she stood up and looked directly at me with that same cold smile I remembered from the hospital. I want Marcus Hale to know that I regret nothing, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. Oliver was a means to an end, and if I'd been more careful, he would have died as planned. The only thing I'm sorry about is getting caught. The casual way she talked about planning my son's death made several people in the gallery gasp audibly. Even her own lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and pretend he'd never met her. Judge Hendricks didn't even blink. Thank you for that illuminating insight into your character, Ms. Mercer. It makes my next decision considerably easier. The sentencing was everything I'd hoped for and more. Life without the possibility of parole for the attempted murder charges, plus additional time for fraud and conspiracy. Claudine would die in prison, which was exactly what she deserved. As they led her away in shackles, she turned back one last time to look at me. This isn't over, Marcus, she called out, her voice echoing through the courtroom. There are others like me out there. Others who remember what you did. No, I said, loud enough for her to hear, there aren't. Because Logan had made sure of that. After the sentencing, I stood on the courthouse steps breathing fresh air and feeling lighter than I had in months. Detective Ryan Keller found me there, smoking a cigarette and looking satisfied with the day's work. Good outcome, he said, offering me a cigarette that I declined. Justice served, bad guy behind bars, all that good stuff. Yeah, I agreed. All that good stuff. Ryan studied my face for a moment, and I could see him thinking about all the convenient coincidences that had eliminated the rest of Claudine's network. Funny thing about justice, though? Sometimes it comes from unexpected places. Sometimes it does. You wouldn't know anything about those unexpected places, would you, Marcus? I looked him straight in the eye and smiled. Not a thing, detective. I'm just a regular guy who got lucky that his wife's criminal friends all had such terrible accidents. Ryan laughed and flicked his cigarette into the street. Terrible accidents. Yeah, that's one way to put it. That evening, I picked Oliver up from school and took him out for ice cream to celebrate what I told him was the end of all the legal stuff. He was more interested in his chocolate chip cookie dough cone than the details of courtroom proceedings, which was exactly how it should be. Dad, he said as we walked home, are we safe now? Like really safe? Yeah, buddy, I said, ruffling his hair. We're really safe now. And for the first time in months, I actually believed it. 18 months later, I was sitting on the front porch of our new house in the mountains, watching Oliver chase fireflies in the backyard while the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple that no Instagram filter could ever capture. The kid was laughing, really laughing, the kind of deep belly laugh that bubbles up from somewhere pure and untainted by the knowledge that monsters sometimes wear familiar faces and pack poison in superhero lunchboxes. We'd left the old house 6 months after Claudine's sentencing. I told Oliver it was because I wanted a fresh start, which wasn't exactly a lie, but the whole truth was that I couldn't stand walking through those rooms anymore knowing what had happened there. Every time I looked at the kitchen where she'd prepared her lethal meals, every time I passed Oliver's bedroom, where she'd stood calculating his worth like he was a commodity instead of a child, I felt something dark and angry stirring in my chest that I didn't particularly want to live with on a daily basis. The new place was everything the old house wasn't. Smaller, simpler, surrounded by actual nature instead of manicured suburbia. Oliver had his own room overlooking a stream that babbled constantly, like nature's own white noise machine. And I had a home office where I could run hail dynamics remotely while keeping my son within shouting distance at all times. Not that I was paranoid or anything, but let's just say I developed some trust issues regarding who got to spend unsupervised time with my kid. Oliver adjusted to the move with the resilience that kids seem to possess in unlimited quantities. Within a week, he'd made friends with the neighbor's dog, discovered that the stream was full of interesting rocks that absolutely had to be collected, and announced that mountain living was way cooler than regular living, because you could see actual stars at night instead of just streetlights pretending to be stars. The physical recovery from the arsenic poisoning had taken about 6 months. Dr. Lee had warned me that there might be long-term effects, cognitive issues, developmental delays, chronic health problems, but Oliver had bounced back with the kind of stubborn determination that made me proud and terrified in equal measure. The kid was tougher than I'd given him credit for, which was saying something since I'd already thought he was pretty damn tough. The psychological recovery was more complicated. Oliver had nightmares for months about Clara coming back, about being sick again, about not being able to trust the food on his plate. We did therapy sessions with Dr. Rebecca Morrison, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery and had the patience of a saint when it came to dealing with Oliver's very reasonable trust issues around new adults. It's normal for him to be hypervigilant, Dr. Morrison had explained during one of our sessions. Someone he trusted betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way possible. He's going to need time to learn that not all adults are dangerous, that not all food is potentially harmful, that his world can be safe again. The breakthrough came about 8 months after we moved, when Oliver drew me a picture that I still keep framed on my desk. It showed the 3 of us, me, him, and Clara, standing in front of our old house. But Clara had been scribbled over with red crayon so thoroughly that she was basically just a red blob with stick arms, and there was a big red X covering her entire figure. Above the picture, in his careful 9-year-old handwriting, he'd written, "Bad Clara gone forever." It broke my heart and healed it at the same time. Adrian had moved his practice to a town about 30 minutes away from our new place, close enough that he could continue monitoring Oliver's recovery, but far enough that we weren't constantly reminded of the circumstances that had brought us together. He'd become something like an uncle to Oliver, the kind of steady male presence that helped balance out my probably overprotective single-father energy. "You're doing good, Marcus," he told me during one of our regular check-ins over coffee. "Oliver's thriving. You're building a new life, and you've managed to keep your sanity through something that would have destroyed most people." Keeping my sanity was debatable, but I appreciated the vote of confidence. Detective Ryan Keller had gotten a promotion to lieutenant partly based on his work breaking up what the media had dubbed the Black Widow Syndicate. The fact that most of the network had conveniently eliminated itself through a series of tragic accidents hadn't hurt his clearance rate, and Ryan was smart enough not to look gift horses in the mouth too closely. "Sometimes the universe just works out in our favor," he'd said when I congratulated him on the promotion. "Sometimes bad people have bad luck, and sometimes that bad luck happens to solve a lot of problems for good people." We both knew exactly what kind of bad luck he was talking about, and we both knew that some conversations were better left unspoken. Logan Pierce had disappeared back into whatever shadow world he operated in, but not before stopping by to check on Oliver and make sure there were no loose ends that might come back to bite us. "Clean operation," he'd reported with the professional satisfaction of someone who took pride in his work. "No survivors, no evidence, no organizational structure left to rebuild. Your family's threat level is essentially zero." Essentially zero. In Logan's world, that was probably as close to a guarantee of safety as you could get. But the thing about going through something like this is that it changes you in ways you don't expect and can't always control. I wasn't the same Marcus Hale who'd laughed about a lunchbox mix-up in his office 18 months ago. That guy had been naive, trusting, comfortable in his assumptions about how the world worked, and who could be trusted with the things that mattered most. This Marcus Hale checked Oliver's breathing every night before going to bed, not because I thought something was wrong, but because I needed the physical confirmation that he was alive and safe. This Marcus Hale had a gun safe in his closet and knew how to use everything in it, because I'd learned that sometimes the people who want to hurt your family don't give you the luxury of calling 911 and waiting for help to arrive. This Marcus Hale had killed 9 people. I hadn't pulled any triggers personally. Logan and his team had handled the actual wet work while I maintained plausible deniability from a comfortable distance. But I'd funded the operation, planned the strategy, and made the decision that those people needed to die in order for my son to live safely. Their blood was on my hands as surely as if I'd stood in that Nevada compound and watched the flames consume everything Doyle had built. The weird thing was how little guilt I felt about it. Maybe that made me a monster too, just a different kind of monster than Claudine and her network. Maybe crossing that line had fundamentally altered something in my moral landscape that couldn't be uncrossed. But when I looked at Oliver laughing in our backyard, when I watched him sleep peacefully in his bed without nightmares about poisoned cookies, when I saw him trust me completely to keep him safe, I couldn't bring myself to regret the choices I'd made. Love isn't always soft and gentle and forgiving. Sometimes love is fierce and protective and willing to do terrible things to keep the innocent safe. Sometimes love looks like a father sitting in his kitchen, funding an assassination campaign while his son does homework at the table, because that's what it takes to ensure the child he adores will live to see his 10th birthday. I'd learned something about myself in the dark months after Claudine's arrest, something that probably should have frightened me more than it did. When someone threatens your child, really threatens them, not just playground bullying or hurt feelings, but actual life or death danger, you don't argue with them. You don't negotiate. You don't hope that the system will protect what matters most to you. You finish it. You eliminate the threat completely and permanently, using whatever tools are available and whatever methods are necessary, because the alternative is unthinkable. You do whatever it takes to ensure that your child can grow up safe and happy and unafraid, even if that means becoming someone you never thought you could be. Oliver called to me from the backyard, holding up a particularly impressive firefly in his cupped hands. "Dad, look. This one's huge. Can we keep it?" "Let it go, buddy," I called back. "It's got its own family to get home to." He nodded solemnly and opened his hands, watching the firefly blink away into the gathering darkness. Then he ran back toward the house, his face bright with the kind of pure joy that made every difficult choice worthwhile. I watched him bound up the porch steps, grass stains on his knees and dirt under his fingernails, and absolutely no fear in his eyes. I felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't experienced since before Claudine entered our lives. Peace, contentment, the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you've done what needed to be done and the people you love are safe because of it. If monsters ever came for us again, and given what I'd learned about how dark the world really was, that remained a possibility. They'd find a father who was no longer naive about the lengths he was willing to go to protect his son. They'd find someone who'd already crossed every line that mattered and was perfectly comfortable doing it again if the situation required it. Because that's what real love looks like when the stakes are life and death. It's not pretty, it's not noble, and it's definitely not something they teach you about in parenting books. But it's effective, and in the end, Oliver's safety was the only outcome that truly mattered. My narcissistic ex-wife confronted me at Starbucks. "My new rich husband makes you look completely pathetic." I said, "That's nice." Then I told her new husband about her untreated STD collection. 24 hours later, she was single and publicly exposed. You know those days when you think the universe is finally cutting you some slack? Yeah, well, the universe has a twisted sense of humor, and I'm apparently its favorite punchline. All I wanted was my usual Tuesday morning ritual. Walk into Starbucks, order my Vinny cold brew with oat milk, because regular milk is apparently the devil now. According to my therapist, grab a table by the window, and pretend to be a functioning adult for exactly 17 minutes before facing another soul-crushing day at the office. Simple, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. The moment I stepped through those glass doors, breathing in that familiar aroma of overpriced coffee beans and crushed dreams, I should have known something was off. The barista, some 20-something kid with more piercings than a medieval torture chamber, gave me this look. Not the usual dead-behind-the-eyes customer service stare, but something else. Something that screamed, "Bro, you're about to get absolutely wrecked, and I've got front-row seats to this dumpster fire." But did I listen to my gut? Of course not. I'm apparently a slow learner, which explains why I was married to Satan's favorite cheerleader for 3 years. I walked up to the counter, pulled out my phone to check if I had enough on my Starbucks card. Spoiler alert. I didn't, because adulting is expensive. When I heard it, that laugh, that god-awful, fake as a $3 bill laugh that still haunts my nightmares. I turned around, and there she was. Clarissa, my ex-wife. The human embodiment of every warning label ever created, standing there like she owned the place. Actually, scratch that. She was standing there like she owned the entire zip code and was considering expanding her empire to neighboring counties. Now, let me paint you a picture here, because this woman doesn't just enter a room. She makes an entrance that would make Broadway performers weep with envy. Designer heels that probably cost more than my rent, clicking against the tile floor like some demented metronome. Oversized sunglasses perched on her head indoors, because apparently the fluorescent lighting was too harsh for her delicate constitution. And clinging to her arm like a barnacle on a yacht was Victor, her new husband, walking ATM, and certified grade A sucker. The cafe, which had been humming with the usual morning crowd of caffeine-dependent zombies, suddenly felt like it had morphed into Madison Square Garden, and I was about to be the main event in a wrestling match I never signed up for. Every head turned, every conversation paused, every phone came out. Welcome to the Clarissa Show, folks. Admission is free, but your dignity will cost you everything. She spotted me immediately, of course. It's like she has some sort of radar for detecting when I'm trying to have a peaceful moment. Her perfectly contoured face lit up with that smile. You know the one I'm talking about. The smile that says, "Oh look, fresh meat for the grinder." She whispered something to Victor, who looked about as thrilled as a vegetarian at a barbecue competition, and then they started walking over. Now, I've been through therapy. 6 months of Dr. Martinez explaining that I need to set boundaries, practice mindfulness, and not engage with toxic behavior. 6 months of breathing exercises and visualization techniques. 6 months of learning to say things like, "That's not my circus, and those aren't my monkeys." But apparently, when faced with the ringmaster herself, all that expensive therapy goes right out the window faster than a college student's diet plan during finals week. Well, Clarissa purred, her voice carrying across the cafe like she was addressing her adoring public. If it isn't my dear ex-husband. Still drinking that cheap coffee, I see. Cheap coffee. This stuff costs more than some people's hourly wage, but sure, let's call it cheap. I took a deep breath, channeled my inner Zen master, and managed what I hoped was a neutral expression. Hello, Clarissa. But oh no, she wasn't done. This was just the opening act. She positioned herself and Victor right in front of the counter, ensuring maximum visibility for her performance. The barista kid looked like he was considering calling security, his manager, and possibly the National Guard. "Victor, darling," she said, loud enough for the people in the parking lot to hear. "This is my ex-husband I was telling you about. The one who never could provide the lifestyle I deserved." Victor, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. The poor guy was probably wondering what he'd gotten himself into. If I wasn't so busy trying not to have a public meltdown, I might have felt sorry for him. Keyword being might. Then came the coup de grace, delivered with all the subtlety of a brick through a window. "My new rich husband makes you look completely pathetic." The entire cafe went silent. I'm talking library during finals week silent. Even the espresso machine seemed to hold its breath. Every eye in the place was on me, waiting to see how I'd respond to being verbally eviscerated by my ex-wife in front of God, country, and a bunch of strangers who just wanted their morning caffeine fix. Now, the old me, the guy who'd spent 3 years walking on eggshells and absorbing her emotional abuse like some kind of masochistic sponge, that guy would have either exploded in anger or shrunk away in embarrassment. But this new me, this post-therapy, boundaries setting, give zero damns version of myself, I simply picked up my Veni cold brew with oat milk, took a long, deliberate sip, and looked her straight in the eyes. "That's nice." 2 words. That's all I gave her. 2 simple, utterly neutral words that somehow managed to deflate her entire performance like a balloon at a porcupine convention. I watched her face go through about 17 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, anger, disbelief, and finally, that familiar rage that used to send me running for cover. But I didn't run. I just stood there, sipping my overpriced coffee, while she processed the fact that her grand dramatic moment had been met with all the enthusiasm of a DMV employee on a Monday morning. The crowd was still watching, phones still recording, but the energy had shifted. Suddenly, she looked less like a triumphant queen and more like someone who'd just realized they'd shown up to a costume party in regular clothes. I finished my coffee, nodded politely to Victor, who honestly looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, and walked out of that Starbucks with my head held high. Behind me, I could hear Clarissa's voice rising in pitch, probably launching into some damage control routine, but I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I'd encountered Hurricane Clarissa and emerged not just unscathed, but somehow stronger. Of course, I had no idea that this little coffee shop encounter was just the opening salvo in what would become the most spectacular implosion I'd ever witnessed. But that's a story for another chapter. Walking out of that Starbucks feeling like some kind of Zen master was all well and good, but the universe wasn't about to let me off that easy. The moment I got back to my car, sitting there in the parking lot like some pathetic loser who'd just been publicly roasted by his ex-wife, the memories started flooding back. And let me tell you, when Clarissa-related memories come knocking, they don't just politely ring the doorbell. They kick down the damn door and ransack the place. I sat there gripping my steering wheel, watching her through the coffee shop window as she continued her little performance for poor Victor. Even from a distance, I could see her animated gestures, probably spinning some sob story about what a terrible husband I'd been. Classic Clarissa move. Rewrite history so she's always the victim and everyone else is the villain. The woman could have been a screenwriter for Lifetime movies, except her plots were way more twisted than anything they'd dare air on television. You want to know what Clarissa was really like? Picture a tornado that learned how to wear designer clothes and manipulate people's emotions for sport. That was my wife for 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Not that I was counting or anything. Okay, fine, I was totally counting, because living with her was like being trapped in an escape room designed by someone who genuinely hated humanity. The memories started rolling like some kind of psychological horror movie montage. Our first fight, which happened approximately 3 weeks into our marriage, when she decided that my apartment wasn't suitable for her image. My apartment, by the way, was a perfectly decent 2-bedroom place with actual sunlight and functioning appliances. But according to Clarissa, it screamed middle-class mediocrity and was an embarrassment to her personal brand. Because apparently, even back then, she was treating her life like some kind of Instagram influencer fever dream. Then there was the time she convinced me to max out my credit cards for her business venture, a boutique clothing line that was going to revolutionize affordable luxury. Spoiler alert, the only thing that got revolutionized was my credit score, which dropped faster than my self-esteem during that marriage. The business lasted exactly 6 weeks before she decided that retail was beneath her creative vision and moved on to her next brilliant scheme. But the manipulation wasn't just financial. Oh no, that would have been too simple for Hurricane Clarissa. She had this way of making me feel like I was constantly walking through a minefield where the mines kept moving. One day I'd be the best husband in the world for bringing her favorite takeout, and the next day I'd be emotionally unavailable for not immediately understanding why she was upset about something that happened in a dream she had. A dream about me that I wasn't even present for because, it was her brain making it up while she slept. The gaslighting was Olympic-level stuff. She could make me question my own memory about conversations we'd had the day before. I never said that, she'd insist, with the kind of conviction that made me wonder if I was losing my mind. You're imagining things again. You really should see someone about your memory problems. Meanwhile, I'd have the text messages right there on my phone proving otherwise, but somehow she'd still make me feel crazy for bringing them up. And don't even get me started on the social manipulation. Clarissa had this talent for turning every social gathering into her personal therapy session, where she'd air our dirty laundry while positioning herself as the long-suffering wife married to an insensitive brute. Our friends, well, my friends, because Clarissa collected people like trophies and discarded them just as easily, started looking at me like I was some kind of domestic villain. You need to be more understanding, they'd say. Marriage is hard work. She just needs support. Support. Right. I was supporting her so hard I forgot what my own needs even looked like. I became a ghost in my own life, tiptoeing around her moods, anticipating her demands, constantly trying to prevent the next explosion. You know that feeling when you're watching a horror movie and you can see the killer hiding behind the door, but the main character keeps walking toward it anyway? That was my entire marriage. Except I was both the clueless victim and the terrified audience member. The worst part? She was brilliant at it. Absolutely brilliant. In public, she was charming, vivacious, the kind of woman who could light up a room and make everyone feel like they were part of something special. People loved her. Hell, I loved her, which is probably why it took me so long to realize that the woman I'd fallen for was basically a carefully constructed performance designed to reel in suckers like me. But the real Clarissa, the one who emerged behind closed doors, was something else entirely. That woman was vindictive, petty, and had a memory for perceived slights that would make elephants jealous. She could hold grudges for months, bringing up things I'd said or done wrong as ammunition in completely unrelated arguments. Remember when you forgot to compliment my hair 3 months ago? That's exactly the kind of thoughtless behavior I'm talking about. The final straw came when I caught her with Raymond, her work friend, who apparently worked very closely with her in our bedroom, while I was pulling a double shift to pay for her latest shopping spree. I came home early with flowers, actual flowers, because I was still trying to save a marriage that had been dead for months, and found them having what she later called an emotional connection that transcended physical boundaries. Translation: they were screwing on the couch I'd bought with my Christmas bonus. Did she apologize? Of course not. According to Clarissa, it was my fault for driving her to seek emotional fulfillment elsewhere, with my workaholic tendencies and inability to provide the lifestyle she deserved. Apparently, working 60-hour weeks to keep up with her spending habits made me the villain in this story. The divorce was a masterclass in scorched earth warfare. She didn't just want out. She wanted to burn down everything I'd ever cared about on her way to the exit. She spread lies to anyone who'd listen, telling people I was abusive, controlling, and financially irresponsible. She keyed my car, threw a brick through my apartment window, and somehow convinced my boss that I was having emotional stability issues that were affecting my work performance. But here's the thing about karma. Sometimes it keeps receipts. While Clarissa was busy trying to destroy my life, she'd forgotten about one tiny detail. Due to some bureaucratic mix-up with our insurance company, she was still listed on my plan for a few months after the divorce was finalized. And guess whose medical bills kept showing up in my mailbox? Bills for STD testing, treatments, and follow-up appointments that painted a very interesting picture of my ex-wife's extracurricular activities. Chlamydia, gonorrhea, HPV. The holy trinity of poor life choices, all documented in black and white medical records that she'd apparently never bothered to mention during our marriage. Or after it, for that matter. Just sitting there in my mailbox like little time bombs of irony, waiting for the perfect moment to explode. That evening, I was walking through the parking garage of the Westfield shopping center, minding my own business like a functional adult who definitely wasn't plotting anything. I'd gone there to grab some groceries. You know, exciting stuff like frozen dinners and the kind of cereal that doesn't require milk because I keep forgetting to buy milk. Real thrilling bachelor life right there. But as I was walking back to my car, arms full of enough lean cuisine to feed a small army of depressed office workers, I spotted something that made me stop dead in my tracks. A brand new white Mercedes-Benz, gleaming under the fluorescent garage lights like some kind of automotive unicorn. And not just any Mercedes. We're talking about the kind that costs more than most people's houses, the kind that screams, "I have more money than sense, and I want everyone to know it." But here's the kicker. This beautiful, pristine, probably worth more than my annual salary machine was parked across 2 spaces. 2 freaking spaces. Now, I'm not usually the type to get worked up about parking violations. Live and let live, right? But there's something about entitled parking that just gets under my skin like a splinter made of pure irritation. It's like the automotive equivalent of cutting in line at Starbucks while talking loudly on your phone about your CrossFit routine. Just don't. But then I saw the license plate, and everything clicked into place like some kind of cosmic puzzle piece falling exactly where it was supposed to. Victor won. Because of course it was. Of course Mr. Rich husband himself would have vanity plates that basically announced to the world, "Hi, I'm Victor, and I'm better than you because I have money." The subtlety was overwhelming. I stood there for a moment, grocery bags cutting off circulation to my fingers, staring at this monument to automotive arrogance. This was Clarissa's new meal ticket, her latest victim, her current mark, and what I was beginning to realize was probably a long line of financially successful suckers who'd fallen for her act. Poor bastard probably thought he'd won the lottery when he met her. Little did he know he'd actually bought a ticket to the Clarissa Express, destination, financial and emotional ruin. But here's where those medical bills I'd been receiving came back into play like some kind of karmic boomerang. See, Victor might have money, but he didn't have information. Critical, life-altering, get yourself tested immediately kind of information. And suddenly, standing there in that parking garage surrounded by the smell of exhaust fumes and the distant sound of shopping carts being abandoned by people who've given up on life, I had what you might call a moment of clarity. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app, because apparently I was about to become the world's most reluctant whistleblower. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment. Was I really about to do this? Was I really about to insert myself back into the Clarissa drama tornado after working so hard to escape it? The rational part of my brain, the part that had been through 6 months of therapy and knew all about letting go and moving forward, was screaming at me to mind my own business and walk away. But then I thought about Victor. Sure, he was probably a pompous rich guy with terrible taste in both women and parking etiquette, but he was also a human being who deserved to know what he was dealing with. He deserved to know that his new wife came with some pretty serious health complications that she'd apparently forgotten to mention during their courtship. Call it public service, call it karma, call it whatever you want. The man had a right to know. So I started typing. Not some angry rant filled with accusations and personal attacks, because that would have just made me look like a bitter ex-husband with an axe to grind. No, I kept it simple, factual, and to the point. Just the medical truth, delivered with all the emotion of a grocery list. Your wife has chlamydia, gonorrhea, and HPV. Prescriptions in her cabinet confirm it. Get tested. I read it over 3 times, checking for typos because nothing ruins a good anonymous tip-off like autocorrect changing chlamydia to chameleon. The message was clean, direct, and most importantly, completely true. No lies, no exaggerations, no personal opinions about Clarissa's character or our failed marriage. Just the medical facts that she'd apparently decided weren't worth sharing with her new husband. Then came the delivery method. I could have just left it on his windshield, but that seemed too risky. What if it blew away or got wet? This was important information that needed to reach its intended target. So I folded the note carefully, walked over to that obnoxiously parked Mercedes, and tucked it securely under the driver's side windshield wiper where Victor couldn't possibly miss it. As I walked away, grocery bags swinging at my sides like some kind of suburban warrior heading home from battle, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. Pure, unadulterated relief. Like I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. For the first time since that disaster of a marriage ended, I felt like I'd done something right. Not vengeful, not petty, not cruel, just right. I wasn't trying to hurt Clarissa, despite everything she'd put me through. I wasn't trying to break up her marriage or ruin her new life. I was simply providing information that any reasonable person would want to have. If someone had known about my ex-wife's medical situation and hadn't told me, I would have been furious. This wasn't revenge. This was basic human decency with a side of medical necessity. The drive home was probably the most peaceful 20 minutes I'd had in months. No angry thoughts about Clarissa, no bitter memories of our marriage, no anxiety about running into her again. Just me, my frozen dinners, and the radio playing some forgettable pop song that I actually found myself humming along to. When was the last time I'd hummed along to anything? I couldn't even remember. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, I was practically whistling. My neighbor Mrs. Chun, who usually looked at me with the kind of pity reserved for stray cats and people who buy lottery tickets, actually smiled and waved. Maybe I looked different somehow. Maybe I looked like someone who'd finally figured out how to let karma do its job instead of trying to manage everything himself. I unpacked my groceries, popped a lean cuisine into the microwave, and settled onto my couch with a beer and the remote control. For the first time in years, I felt lighter, like someone had removed a backpack full of rocks that I'd been carrying around without even realizing it. Whatever happened next was out of my hands, and somehow, that felt exactly right. I woke up the next morning feeling pretty damn good about myself. You know that feeling when you've had a solid 8 hours of sleep and your conscience is actually clear for once? Yeah, that was me. I made coffee in my tiny kitchen, humming some random tune that had been stuck in my head, completely oblivious to the fact that across town, a nuclear bomb was about to detonate in Clarissa's perfectly curated life. My phone started buzzing around 7:23 a.m. Not unusual. I get spam calls all the time from people trying to sell me extended car warranties for a vehicle I sold 3 years ago. But this wasn't a robocall about my non-existent Honda's expiring coverage. This was my buddy Jake, and he sounded like he'd just witnessed a UFO landing in his backyard. "Dude," he said, not even bothering with a proper greeting. "You need to get on Instagram right now. Like, right freaking now." Now, Jake isn't exactly what you'd call an early riser. The guy considers noon to be morning and thinks breakfast is whatever leftover pizza survived the night. For him to be awake before 8 a.m. and calling me about social media meant something major had gone down. I put him on speaker and opened Instagram, not really knowing what to expect. What I found was better than Christmas morning, winning the lottery, and finding out your student loans had been forgiven, all rolled into one beautiful, chaotic package. The first thing I saw was a video posted by someone I didn't recognize. Looked like they were at some fancy outdoor restaurant downtown. The caption read, "When rich people drama goes nuclear in public popcorn fired." The video was shaky, clearly filmed on someone's phone from across a patio, but the audio was crystal clear. And there, in all his expensive suit-wearing glory, was Victor, waving a piece of paper around like he was conducting the world's angriest orchestra. "You lying, manipulative witch," he was shouting, loud enough that every table on that patio had turned to watch the show. "Chlamydia? Gonorrhea? HPV? When exactly were you planning to mention this little detail, Clarissa?" The camera panned to show Clarissa, looking like a deer caught in headlights if deer wore designer clothes and had professionally done highlights. She was doing that thing she always did when cornered, the wide-eyed innocent act that used to work on me, but apparently wasn't flying with Victor. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice had that shaky quality that meant she was lying through her teeth. "Someone's obviously trying to sabotage our relationship. This is clearly fake." "Fake?" Victor's voice went up about 3 octaves. "I went to your apartment this morning, Clarissa. I opened your medicine cabinet. Want to explain why you have prescription bottles for all 3 of these lovely conditions? With your name on them? From last month." The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife. Even through my phone screen, I could see Clarissa doing mental gymnastics, trying to figure out how to spin this disaster into something that wasn't her fault. But for once in her manipulative life, she was coming up empty. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Bro, there are 12 videos of this already, and it happened like an hour ago. This is spreading faster than, well, faster than whatever diseases your ex-wife has been hiding." I switched to Twitter, and holy hell, #Clarissagate was already trending. Not nationally or anything, but locally it was blowing up like the 4th of July. People were posting videos from multiple angles, because apparently half the city had been at this restaurant when Victor decided to air his dirty laundry in public. Some genius had even created a compilation video with dramatic music. The comments were absolutely savage. People who'd apparently known Clarissa were coming out of the woodwork with their own stories. I knew she was shady when she tried to flirt with my husband at the charity gala. She scammed my friend out of $500 for some pyramid scheme last year. Always wondered how she could afford those designer bags on a receptionist's salary. But the real kicker came when I scrolled down and found a post from Victor himself. Apparently, after the public confrontation, he'd gone straight back to Clarissa's luxury apartment, the one she'd probably convinced him to pay for, and conducted his own little investigation. And being a smart guy with more money than patience, he'd documented everything. The post was a masterpiece of scorched earth warfare. Photos of prescription bottles, test results, medical bills, all laid out like evidence in a courtroom. For anyone wondering if the rumors are true, he'd written, "Here's your proof. My soon-to-be ex-wife has been hiding some serious health issues while putting me at risk. Ladies and gentlemen, always get tested and always demand honesty from your partners." Within 2 hours, that post had more likes than most people get in a year. The comments section was a mix of people applauding Victor for his transparency and others sharing their own horror stories about dishonest partners. It was like Clarissa had accidentally started a movement for sexual health awareness. Except she was the cautionary tale instead of the inspirational speaker. My phone kept buzzing with notifications. Friends I hadn't heard from in months were sending me screenshots, asking if this was my ex-wife. Coworkers were texting me links with crying laughing emojis. Even my mom called, and she never calls unless someone's dead or she's seen something on Facebook that convinced her the world is ending. "Honey," she said, "is this that awful woman you were married to? The one who threw a tantrum at Christmas dinner because we didn't have organic cranberry sauce?" "Yeah, Mom, that's her." "Well," she said with the kind of satisfaction that only mothers can achieve, "I always knew she was trouble. You're better off without her, sweetheart. Much better off." The beautiful thing about watching this unfold was that I didn't have to do anything. I wasn't posting angry comments or sharing the videos or adding fuel to the fire. I was just sitting in my apartment, eating cereal, and watching karma work its magic in real time. For years, Clarissa had gotten away with her lies and manipulations because she was smart enough to keep her victims isolated. But this time, she'd messed with someone who had the resources and the social connections to expose her properly. Victor wasn't some broke, emotionally damaged guy she could gaslight into submission. He was wealthy, well-connected, and apparently had zero tolerance for being played. When he discovered those medical records, he didn't just confront her privately. He made sure the whole world knew exactly what kind of person they were dealing with. By noon, #ClarissaGate had evolved beyond just the STD revelation. People were sharing stories about her financial schemes, her fake pregnancy scare with some poor guy from her yoga class, her habit of borrowing expensive items and never returning them. It was like someone had opened a dam, and years of suppressed Clarissa horror stories were flooding social media. If I thought yesterday's drama was peak entertainment, I was dead wrong. Apparently, Clarissa had spent the night plotting her comeback tour, and by Wednesday morning, she was ready to launch what can only be described as the most spectacular backfire in social media history. I'm talking Hindenburg-level disaster, except instead of hydrogen, it was filled with lies, desperation, and enough delusion to power a small city. I was sitting at my desk at work, pretending to review quarterly reports while actually refreshing Instagram every 30 seconds like some kind of digital drug addict, when Clarissa's counteroffensive began. She'd posted a lengthy statement on all her social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, even LinkedIn, because apparently professional networking sites aren't immune to personal drama anymore. The post was a masterclass in victim manipulation, complete with carefully staged photos of her looking devastated in designer athleisure wear. You know the look. Artfully messed hair, just enough makeup to look naturally beautiful, but not enough to seem like she was trying too hard, sitting in what was clearly her expensive apartment, but angled to look humble and relatable. "I never thought I'd have to address this publicly," the post began, "but recent events have forced my hand. I'm the victim of a vicious campaign by my jealous ex-husband, who apparently can't stand to see me happy and successful. The evidence being shared is fabricated and taken out of context. I'm consulting with my legal team about pursuing charges for harassment, defamation, and invasion of privacy." Oh, this was rich. Clarissa was actually trying to flip the script and make herself the wounded party. She was claiming that somehow, magically, her own prescription bottles and medical records had been fabricated by little old me. Because apparently, in her delusional world, I had the resources and technical skills to create fake pharmaceutical packaging and forge medical documents just to mess with her new marriage. But wait, it gets better. She'd also posted a series of throwback photos from our marriage, carefully curated to show only the happy moments. There we were at my cousin's wedding, smiling like the perfect couple. There was our honeymoon in Cancun, both of us looking disgustingly happy on the beach. She'd even included photos from my birthday dinner 2 years ago, where she'd surprised me with tickets to a baseball game. The caption for that particular carousel read, "These are the memories of the man who's now trying to destroy my life." Mental illness is real, and I pray that my ex-husband gets the help he needs instead of continuing to hurt innocent people. Mental illness. She was actually playing the mental health card, suggesting that I was some kind of unhinged stalker who'd fabricated an elaborate revenge plot because I couldn't handle her moving on. The audacity was breathtaking, even by Clarissa's standards. But here's where her plans started falling apart faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. The internet, God bless its beautiful, chaotic soul, doesn't forget. And the internet definitely doesn't appreciate being lied to, especially when the lies are this transparent. The first crack in her narrative came from someone called at Truth Seeker 2023, who'd apparently taken it upon themselves to fact-check Clarissa's claims. They'd posted side-by-side screenshots of her original story versus Victor's evidence, with detailed analysis of why her version didn't add up. How exactly does someone fabricate prescription bottles with pharmacy labels, dates, and doctor signatures? They wrote, asking for the entire internet. Then came the avalanche. People who'd known Clarissa personally started dropping truth bombs in the comments like they were conducting a controlled demolition of her reputation. Her former coworker from the marketing firm posted, "Girl, I worked with you for 2 years. You literally told me about having to get tested after that conference in Vegas. Stop lying." Her yoga instructor chimed in, "I remember you asking me about natural remedies for women's health issues because you were embarrassed about taking antibiotics." This was last month, Clarissa. Even worse for her, people started posting screenshots of old conversations where she'd admitted to various indiscretions. Apparently, Clarissa had never learned the golden rule of modern life. Never put anything in writing that you wouldn't want read aloud in court, because the internet is forever and screenshots are admissible evidence in the court of public opinion. My personal favorite came from someone who'd apparently been her roommate in college. They posted a photo from what looked like a dorm room, showing a young Clarissa holding a bottle of antibiotics with a big grin. The caption read, "Remember when you had to get treated for chlamydia sophomore year, and you made me go with you to the clinic? Pepperidge Farm remembers. So do I. Stop lying, Clarissa." But the real knockout punch came from an unexpected source. Raymond, remember Raymond, the work friend she'd cheated on me with, apparently decided he'd had enough of being associated with this dumpster fire. He posted his own statement, complete with text message screenshots that painted a very different picture of their relationship than the emotional connection narrative Clarissa had spun. For the record, Raymond wrote, "Clarissa told me she was divorced and clean. She specifically said she'd been tested after her marriage ended and everything was fine. If I'd known the truth, I never would have gotten involved. I feel terrible for her current husband and her ex-husband, who apparently tried to warn people about this situation." The comments on Raymond's post were brutal. People were calling Clarissa everything from a walking biohazard to a one-woman public health crisis. Someone had even created a meme using that disaster girl photo, with Clarissa's face photoshopped on and the caption, "When you try to blame your ex for your own STDs." TikTok was having an absolute field day. Someone had created a whole series called Clarissa Chronicles that broke down the entire drama with dramatic reenactments using sock puppets. Another user had made a remix of her victim statement, auto-tuning it to music and adding dancing animated prescription bottles. The internet's capacity for creative mockery never ceases to amaze me. Instagram stories were lighting up with people sharing their own Clarissa encounters. Apparently, she'd been pulling variations of this con for years. The boutique owner who'd never received payment for a custom dress. The landlord who'd had to evict her for non-payment of rent. The girl from her Pilates class whose designer handbag had mysteriously disappeared after a group dinner. By Thursday afternoon, #Clarissagate had evolved into something bigger than just one woman's public meltdown. It had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of social media lies, a case study in how quickly fake victim narratives can collapse under scrutiny, and a masterclass in why you should never underestimate the internet's ability to fact-check your bullshit in real time. The most beautiful part? I still hadn't posted a single comment, shared a single video, or added one word to the online conversation. I was like a ghost at my own vindication party, watching from the sidelines as Clarissa's own lies and the people she'd hurt over the years did all the work for me. Just when I thought this whole situation couldn't get any more ridiculous, Clarissa's family decided to join the party. And by join the party, I mean they showed up like drunk uncles at a wedding, loud, embarrassing, and completely missing the point of what was actually happening. It started Friday morning when I was getting ready for work, enjoying my coffee and scrolling through the latest updates in what the internet had dubbed the Great Clarissa Catastrophe of 2025. I was reading a particularly entertaining thread about someone who'd recognized her from a dating app, where she'd claimed to be a successful entrepreneur and wellness coach, when my phone buzzed with a notification that made my blood run cold. Marcus Rivera had tagged me in a Facebook post. Marcus, for those keeping score at home, is Clarissa's older brother and the kind of guy who peaked in high school and never quite figured out that intimidation tactics don't work as well when you're 34 and still living with your mom. He's basically what would happen if you crossed a wannabe tough guy with a conspiracy theorist and gave them unlimited access to social media. The post was a masterpiece of barely literate rage, complete with more spelling errors than a middle school essay and enough misplaced anger to power a small nuclear reactor. But the really charming part was that he'd included my full name, my workplace, and what I'm pretty sure was meant to be my home address, though he'd gotten the street number wrong. So he was basically threatening some poor stranger who happened to live 2 blocks away from me. This coward destroyed my sister's life with lies, the post read, and now he's going to pay. I know where you work, David Peterson, and I know where you live. You better watch your back, because the Rivera family doesn't forget, and we don't forgive. This isn't over. Now, I've dealt with my share of internet tough guys over the years. Usually, they're all bark and no bite, hiding behind keyboards while living in their parents' basements and surviving on a diet of energy drinks and wounded masculinity. But there's something about having your personal information posted online with threats attached that really gets your attention, even when it comes from someone whose profile picture is him flexing in a gym mirror while wearing a tank top that says Beast Mode. I screenshot the post immediately because I'm not an idiot and I understand that evidence disappears faster than free pizza at a college dorm. Then I called the police, because threatening someone online with your real name attached is basically the criminal equivalent of robbing a bank while holding your driver's license up to the security camera. The officer who took my report was a middle-aged guy named Detective Morrison who looked like he'd seen every type of human stupidity imaginable and had stopped being surprised by it sometime around 2003. When I showed him Marcus's post, he actually chuckled. "Let me get this straight," he said, leaning back in his chair. "This guy posted threats against you using his real Facebook account, tagged your workplace, and included what he thinks is your address. And his profile is completely public." "Yeah, that's pretty much the situation, son," Detective Morrison said with the weary patience of someone who'd probably dealt with similar cases a dozen times that week. "I've been doing this job for 22 years, and I can confidently say that criminals have gotten a lot dumber since social media became a thing. We'll pay Mr. Rivera a visit and explain to him why threatening people online is a bad idea." While I was filing the police report, my phone was blowing up with notifications. Apparently, Marcus's brilliant threat had been screenshot and shared across multiple platforms, because nothing says family loyalty like making your sister's situation worse by committing crimes on social media. People were having an absolute field day with his post, pointing out everything from his grammar mistakes to the fact that he'd basically doxed himself while trying to dox me. But Marcus wasn't done embarrassing the Rivera family name. Oh no, this was just the opening act. By noon, he doubled down with another post that somehow managed to be even more unhinged than the first one. This time, he'd recruited some of his equally brilliant friends to join his online crusade, and they were all posting variations of the same threat, like some kind of dysfunctional boy band with a vendetta. The really sad part was watching this all play out while getting sympathy calls from people I hadn't talked to in years. My mom called, crying because someone had shown her Marcus's post, and she was worried about my safety. My boss pulled me aside to ask if I needed to take some time off, or if we needed to increase security at the office. Even my neighbor Mrs. Chen knocked on my door with a casserole and offered to keep an eye out for suspicious characters in the parking lot. Mrs. Chen, by the way, is about 5 feet tall and 73 years old, but she was dead serious about protecting me from Clarissa's family. "I have pepper spray," she informed me with the kind of determination usually reserved for war veterans. "And I'm not afraid to use it on punks who threaten my neighbors." The whole situation would have been flattering if it wasn't so completely insane. Here I was, being treated like some kind of victim in witness protection, all because I'd left a note on a windshield with publicly available medical information. Meanwhile, the actual person who'd been hiding STDs from her partners was being defended by her family like she was some kind of persecuted saint. The cherry on top of this dysfunction Sunday came when Detective Morrison called me back around 3 p.m. Apparently, They'd paid Marcus a visit at his mom's house, because of course he still lived with his mom, and the conversation had gone about as well as you'd expect. Mr. Rivera seemed genuinely surprised that posting threats on social media was illegal. Detective Morrison told me with barely concealed amusement. He kept insisting that he was just defending his family's honor, and that freedom of speech meant he could threaten whoever he wanted. We explained to him that freedom of speech doesn't actually work that way, and that his next post threatening you would result in arrest. He seemed to understand after we mentioned jail time. What about the post? Is he taking it down? Already done. Turns out tough guys get very cooperative when you explain felony harassment charges to them. He also wanted me to tell you that he didn't mean anything by it, and he was just upset about his sister. I told him that's what lawyers are for, not Facebook threats. But wait, there's more. Because apparently the Rivera family operates on some kind of hive mind principle, Clarissa's cousin Elena decided to jump into the fray with her own special brand of legal expertise. Elena, who works as a paralegal at some strip mall law firm, sent me a lengthy Facebook message explaining how I was definitely going to prison for defamation, harassment, and emotional distress. The message was hilarious for multiple reasons, not least of which was that Elena seemed to think that stating medical facts constituted defamation, and that leaving a note on someone's car was somehow criminal harassment. She'd clearly been watching too many legal dramas and not paying enough attention during her paralegal classes. My favorite part of Elena's message was when she wrote, "My cousin is consulting with our family attorney, and you're going to be sued for everything you're worth. We have connections in the legal community, and you picked the wrong family to mess with." I screenshot that message too, because at this point I was building quite the collection of Rivera family threats and legal misunderstandings. Then I forwarded it to Detective Morrison, who I was pretty sure was getting as much entertainment out of this situation as I was. Saturday morning brought an unexpected twist that made me question whether I was living in reality or some kind of elaborate social experiment designed to test how much weird stuff one person can handle before their brain completely shorts out. I was sitting on my couch, nursing my second cup of coffee and wondering if the Rivera family had any more legal geniuses waiting in the wings, when my phone buzzed with a message from someone I'd never heard of. "Hi, David. My name is Sylvia Richardson. I'm Victor's sister. I hope you don't mind me reaching out, but I needed to thank you personally for what you did." I stared at that message for a solid 30 seconds, trying to process what I was reading. Victor's sister? How the hell had she gotten my contact information? And more importantly, why was she thanking me? The last thing I needed was to get pulled deeper into this mess by people I'd never met. But curiosity killed the cat, and I've never been known for my self-preservation instincts, so I texted back. "How did you get my number?" "Victor told me your name after he confronted Clarissa. I may have done some investigating. Don't worry, I'm not crazy like that family that's been threatening you online. I just wanted you to know that you saved my brother from making the biggest mistake of his life." Turns out, Sylvia Richardson was nothing like what I'd expected from Victor's family. She was a nurse practitioner who worked in women's health, and she'd been suspicious of Clarissa from day one. Not because of jealousy or family protectiveness, but because she'd recognized the signs of someone hiding serious health issues. "I tried to talk to Victor about insisting on STD testing before they got intimate," she wrote, "but he was so head over heels that he thought I was being paranoid. He said Clarissa had assured him she was clean and had been tested recently." Men can be so naive when they're thinking with the wrong head. Over the next hour, Sylvia and I exchanged messages that painted a very different picture of the Richardson family than I'd imagined. They weren't just wealthy people throwing money around. They were actually decent human beings who'd been genuinely concerned about Victor's whirlwind romance with someone who seemed too good to be true. "My mother hired a private investigator," Sylvia admitted. "Not to interfere, but to protect Victor. She's seen too many gold diggers target successful men in our social circle. But the investigator couldn't find any medical records or history that would have revealed what you told Victor. Your note probably saved him from months or years of hidden health risks." But Sylvia wasn't the only unexpected ally to emerge from this chaos. Later that afternoon, I got a message that nearly made me choke on my sandwich. It was from someone named Helena Martinez, and the first line made my blood pressure spike. "I think we need to talk about Raymond." Raymond, the work friend who'd been screwing my wife in our bed while I was working overtime to pay for her shopping addiction. The same Raymond who'd recently posted his own statement distancing himself from Clarissa's lies. What could his wife possibly want with me? I know this is weird, Helena's message continued. But I've been following the whole Clarissa situation online, and some things are starting to make sense. Raymond told me he was working late a lot during the time period when your marriage was falling apart. I'm starting to think those late nights at the office weren't exactly work-related. Oh, this was getting interesting. Helena had apparently been doing her own detective work, and the timeline she'd pieced together was painting a very different picture of her husband's relationship with Clarissa than what she'd been told. I found hotel receipts, she wrote. Credit card charges for restaurants in parts of town where Raymond claimed he never went. And when I saw the medical information about Clarissa, I made Raymond get tested. Guess what? He's been carrying some of the same infections. He swore he didn't know, but the dates don't add up. So Raymond, the poor innocent victim of Clarissa's deception, had actually been lying to his own wife about the extent of their affair. Helena had put two and two together and realized that her husband hadn't just been emotionally involved with my ex-wife. He'd been putting both of our health at risk while lying to everyone involved. I'm filing for divorce, Helena informed me. But I wanted to reach out because I think we both deserve to know the truth about what really happened. Would you be willing to share what you know about the timeline of their relationship? This was surreal. Here I was, getting pulled into detective work by the wife of the man who'd helped destroy my marriage. But Helena seemed genuine, and frankly, I was curious to know just how deep Clarissa's deception had gone. Over the next few hours, Helena and I compared notes like a couple of investigators working a cold case. What we discovered was both infuriating and oddly satisfying. Clarissa hadn't just been cheating on me with Raymond. She'd been playing both of us like fiddles in some elaborate con game. The hotel receipts Helena had found dated back almost a year before I'd caught them together. Credit card records showed expensive dinners, weekend getaways, and jewelry purchases that Raymond had apparently been funding while telling his wife he was saving money for their anniversary trip. Meanwhile, Clarissa had been spinning stories to me about girls' weekends and work conferences that were actually romantic getaways with her side piece. She told Raymond that you were abusive and that she was planning to leave you, Helena shared. She said you controlled all the finances and she needed his help to escape. She even showed him bruises that she claimed you'd given her. Bruises that I never gave her because I never laid a hand on her. That's what I figured. Raymond's not the brightest bulb, but he's not usually a homewrecker either. She played the victim card perfectly. Scared wife, controlling husband, desperate for rescue. Classic manipulation. But here's where it gets really twisted. While Clarissa was playing the abused wife to Raymond, she was simultaneously using the money he was spending on her to maintain the lifestyle that she claimed I couldn't provide. She was essentially running a con on both of us, using Raymond's guilt and generosity to fund the very lifestyle she was criticizing me for not being able to afford. The jewelry he bought her? She told me it was from you. Trying to buy her forgiveness after fights, Helena said. The weekend trips? She said you'd booked them as apology vacations. She was using his money to create fake evidence of your generosity while telling him you were cheap and abusive. The level of psychological manipulation was honestly impressive in its scope and complexity. Clarissa had been running a full-scale emotional and financial con operation that would have made seasoned criminals proud. She'd managed to extract money, gifts, and sympathy from Raymond while maintaining her marriage to me, all while setting up both relationships to collapse in ways that would leave her looking like the victim. I have bank statements, hotel records, restaurant receipts, even photos Raymond took that he thought were private moments, Helena told me. If you ever need evidence of what really happened during that time period, I've got documentation going back almost 2 years. Suddenly, I wasn't just some guy who'd left a note on a windshield. I was part of a growing network of people who'd been hurt by Clarissa's lies and were finally comparing notes. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I wasn't alone in understanding just how deep her manipulation had gone. Monday morning hit like a freight train carrying a cargo of pure chaos, and I should have known that Clarissa wasn't going to go down without swinging wildly at everything and everyone within reach. I was sitting at my desk at Morrison & Associates, trying to focus on actual work for the first time in a week, when my boss Janet knocked on my cubicle wall with a look that said, "We need to talk, and you're not going to like it." "David," she said in that carefully neutral tone that managers use when they're about to deliver news that's going to ruin your entire day. "We need you to come to the front desk. There's a situation." A situation. In corporate speak, that could mean anything from a surprise audit to an actual fire, but given the week I'd been having, I had a pretty good idea what kind of situation we were dealing with. I followed Janet through the maze of cubicles, past confused-looking co-workers who were all pretending to work while obviously trying to figure out what fresh hell was about to unfold in their normally boring office environment. The moment I stepped into the lobby, I knew my peaceful morning was officially over. There, in all her designer-clothed glory, was Clarissa, putting on what I can only describe as the performance of her lifetime. She was standing in front of our reception desk, tears streaming down her face, though I noticed she was crying in that specific way that doesn't actually mess up your makeup. Professional victim tears, if you will. Our receptionist, Linda, looked like she'd rather be anywhere else on Earth, including the surface of Mars during a dust storm. She kept glancing between Clarissa's dramatic sobbing and the small crowd of office workers who'd gathered to watch the show, clearly wishing someone had trained her for this particular type of workplace crisis. "That's him," Clarissa announced the moment she saw me, pointing dramatically like she was identifying a suspect in a police lineup. "That's the man who's been stalking and harassing me. He's been spreading lies about me online and ruining my reputation." Now, I've seen Clarissa perform before. Hell, I'd been married to the woman for 3 years, so I was intimately familiar with her greatest hits collection of emotional manipulation tactics. But this was something special, even by her standards. She was going full soap opera, complete with trembling voice, strategic hand gestures, and enough fake vulnerability to power a small theater production. "He's been obsessed with me since our divorce," she continued, addressing the growing audience of my co-workers like they were a jury. "He can't stand that I've moved on and found happiness with someone else. So he's been making up lies about my health, spreading rumors, and trying to destroy my new marriage." Linda, bless her heart, was trying to maintain some semblance of professional composure. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to lower your voice. This is a place of business, and you're disturbing our employees." Disturbing? Clarissa's voice went up about 3 octaves, reaching frequencies that probably confused nearby dogs. "I'm the one who's been disturbed. This man has been stalking me, harassing me, and now he's trying to have me arrested through his police friends." Police friends? Right. Because apparently, filing a legitimate report about online threats now constituted having police friends who were part of some vast conspiracy against her. The paranoia was really starting to show, and it wasn't a good look. Janet stepped forward with the kind of authority that comes from 20 years of dealing with workplace drama. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. If you have a legal issue with one of our employees, you need to handle it through proper channels, not by disrupting our office." "Legal issue?" Clarissa laughed, but it was that unhinged kind of laugh that makes everyone in the room uncomfortable. "Oh, I'll show you a legal issue. My lawyers are going to destroy him. Defamation, harassment, invasion of privacy. We're talking about millions in damages." "Millions?" "Sure, Clarissa. Because obviously, a guy who works in a cubicle and drives a Honda Civic has millions of dollars just lying around for you to claim in your imaginary lawsuit." The delusion was reaching new heights, even for her. Security arrived in the form of Bob, our elderly security guard who usually spends his shifts reading mystery novels and making sure people don't steal office supplies. Bob looked about as prepared for this situation as I would be for performing brain surgery, but he approached Clarissa with the kind of weary patience that suggested he'd dealt with unstable people before. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me," he said, gesturing toward the exit. "Don't touch me," Clarissa shrieked, backing away from Bob like he was carrying a contagious disease. "This is assault. I'm being assaulted. Everyone's a witness." Bob, who hadn't actually touched her and was standing a respectful 3 feet away, looked confused. "Ma'am, I'm just asking you to leave the premises voluntarily." But Clarissa was in full meltdown mode now, and logic had left the building along with her dignity. She started yelling about lawsuits, harassment, and something about her constitutional rights being violated. The whole scene was being recorded by at least half a dozen phones, because nothing says professional workplace like your ex-wife having a public breakdown in front of your coworkers. As security finally managed to escort her out, with her screaming threats and insults the entire way. I stood there trying to process what had just happened. My coworkers were all staring at me with expressions ranging from sympathy to fascination to barely concealed amusement. Someone was definitely going to be talking about this at the office Christmas party for years to come. But Clarissa's public meltdown at my workplace was just the opening act of her Monday counterattack. By lunchtime, she'd launched what I can only describe as a multi-platform assault on reality itself. She'd posted new videos on Instagram and TikTok, claiming that she was being targeted by an organized harassment campaign and that corrupt police officers were refusing to arrest me for my crimes. The most creative part of her strategy was the GoFundMe page she'd set up, titled, "Help Clarissa Fight Back Against Harassment." The description was a masterpiece of victimhood fiction, claiming that she needed money for legal fees, security, and therapy to deal with the traumatic stalking she was experiencing. She was asking for $50,000 because apparently being exposed for lying about STDs is very expensive to recover from. I never thought I'd have to ask for help like this, the GoFundMe description read. But my ex-husband's obsessive behavior has left me financially and emotionally devastated. He's turned the internet against me with lies and fabricated evidence, and now I'm being threatened and harassed by strangers who believe his stories. I just want to move on with my life, but I need resources to fight back against this campaign of destruction. The comments on the GoFundMe were absolutely brutal. People were posting links to the evidence Victor had shared, questioning why she needed money for therapy when she should be spending it on STD treatment, and generally calling out her obvious attempt to profit from her own poor decisions. My personal favorite comment came from someone who wrote, "I'll donate $5 to help you buy a dictionary so you can look up the word consequences." But wait, there's more. Because apparently, Clarissa had recruited more family members to her cause. Her cousin Elena, the paralegal who thought she was a lawyer, had sent me another message, this time claiming to represent Clarissa in some official capacity. "This is your final warning," Elena's message read. "Cease and desist all harassment of my cousin immediately, or face the full consequences of the law. We have documented evidence of your stalking behavior and are prepared to file charges. You have 24 hours to remove all defamatory content you've posted online and issue a public apology." The irony was beautiful. Elena was demanding that I remove defamatory content that I'd never actually posted, while threatening me with stalking charges for leaving a single note with medical facts. Meanwhile, her family had spent the week posting actual threats and harassment online, apparently without understanding that the internet keeps receipts of everything. Tuesday morning brought what can only be described as the nuclear option. I was eating cereal and scrolling through the latest updates on Clarissa's increasingly desperate social media campaign when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail because unknown numbers are usually either telemarketers or people trying to scam me into buying extended warranties for appliances I don't own. But something made me answer, and holy hell, am I glad I did. "Is this David Peterson?" The voice was crisp, professional, and had the kind of authority that made you automatically sit up straighter. "Yes, this is David. Mr. Peterson, my name is Margaret Richardson. I'm Victor's mother. I was wondering if you might have some time to speak with me today about the situation with Clarissa Rivera." Victor's mother, the woman who, according to Sylvia, had hired a private investigator because she'd been suspicious of Clarissa from the beginning. This was either going to be the most awkward conversation of my life or the most enlightening. Possibly both. "I understand this might be unusual," Mrs. Richardson continued, "but I believe you deserve to know what our investigation has uncovered. Would you be available to meet for coffee this afternoon?" An hour later, I found myself sitting in a quiet corner booth at an upscale cafe downtown, face-to-face with a woman who looked like she could run a Fortune 500 company without breaking a sweat. Margaret Richardson was probably in her early 60s, impeccably dressed, and had the kind of sharp intelligence in her eyes that suggested she didn't miss much. She was also carrying a manila folder that looked thick enough to contain the complete works of Shakespeare. "Mr. Peterson," she began, sliding the folder across the table toward me, "I want to start by thanking you for what you did. Victor was furious with me for hiring an investigator, but your note confirmed everything we'd suspected about that woman." I opened the folder, and what I found inside made my jaw drop. So hard I'm surprised it didn't hit the floor and bounce twice. This wasn't just an investigation. This was a complete psychological and financial profile that read like a case study in criminal behavior. We're talking about a level of documentation that would make the FBI proud. The first page was a timeline of Clarissa's romantic relationships over the past 8 years, and let me tell you, it was like reading the playbook for a professional con artist. There were photos, financial records, and even copies of social media posts that painted a picture of systematic manipulation that went way beyond anything I'd imagined. We started investigating after Victor mentioned that Clarissa had asked him to co-sign for a car loan after only dating for 6 weeks, Mrs. Richardson explained. That raised red flags, so we dug deeper. Deeper was an understatement. These people had uncovered Clarissa's entire pattern of behavior, and it was both fascinating and terrifying. According to the investigators' report, I wasn't her first victim, not even close. I was just the latest in a long line of financially stable men who'd been targeted, manipulated, and discarded once they'd outlived their usefulness. The report detailed at least 6 previous relationships that followed the exact same pattern. Clarissa would meet successful men through dating apps or social events, present herself as an independent entrepreneur or wellness coach, and then gradually begin extracting financial support through a carefully orchestrated series of emergencies and opportunities. There was Michael Chun, a software engineer who'd helped her start a boutique fitness business that mysteriously folded after she'd convinced him to invest $30,000. The business never existed beyond a fancy website and some promotional materials. Then there was Robert Martinez, a real estate agent who'd co-signed for her luxury apartment lease and 3 credit cards before discovering she'd been dating 2 other men simultaneously. When he confronted her, she claimed the other men were just friends helping her through a difficult financial period. My personal favorite was Dr. James Wheeler, a dentist who'd not only funded her wellness retreat certification in Bali, but had also paid for cosmetic procedures that she claimed were medically necessary for her anxiety. Dr. Wheeler had eventually discovered that the retreat was actually a luxury vacation with her previous boyfriend, and the anxiety story was complete fiction. Each relationship lasted between 8 months and 3 years, Mrs. Richardson explained, pointing to a detailed chart that looked like something from a criminal profiling textbook. She would identify financially successful men, usually those who'd recently ended long-term relationships or were dealing with loneliness. Then she'd present herself as the perfect partner while systematically extracting money and resources. But here's where it gets really twisted. Clarissa hadn't just been scamming these men financially. She'd been collecting their personal information, social media passwords, and even copies of important documents for safety purposes. The investigator had found evidence that she'd used this information to continue manipulating her victims long after the relationships ended. She maintained fake social media accounts using photos and information from her ex-partners, the report stated. These accounts were used to monitor their activities, interfere with new relationships, and occasionally to catfish other potential victims by pretending to be successful men. The medical component of her deception was even more extensive than I'd realized. The investigator had somehow obtained records showing that Clarissa had been hiding STD infections for over 3 years, potentially exposing at least 8 different partners during that time period. She'd been using multiple doctors and pharmacies to avoid creating a clear paper trail, and had even used fake names at some clinics. The most concerning discovery, Mrs. Richardson said, her voice taking on a darker tone, was evidence of identity theft. She's been using credit cards and bank accounts opened in her victims' names, often continuing to use them months or years after the relationships ended. Identity theft. So Clarissa hadn't just been lying about STDs and scamming money from boyfriends. She'd been committing actual felonies. The investigator had documentation of fraudulent credit applications, forged signatures, and financial accounts that had been opened using stolen personal information from her ex-partners. We've already turned this information over to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Mrs. Richardson informed me matter-of-factly. Several of your fellow victims have been contacted and are cooperating with the investigation. Fellow victims. That's what I was, not a bitter ex-husband, not a stalker, not a jealous loser who couldn't handle his ex-wife moving on. I was a victim of systematic financial and emotional fraud and apparently, I was part of a much larger pattern of criminal behavior. The really beautiful part was that Clarissa had no idea any of this was happening. While she'd been busy having public meltdowns and threatening lawsuits, the Richardson family had been quietly building a case that could potentially put her in federal prison for years. They'd been documenting everything, contacting other victims, and working with law enforcement to build an airtight case against her. "The reason I wanted to meet with you personally," Mrs. Richardson said, closing the folder, "is that we wanted you to know that your note likely prevented Victor from becoming another victim in a much larger scheme. Without your intervention, he probably would have ended up like the others, financially devastated and emotionally traumatized." As I sat there processing everything I'd just learned, I realized that my simple note about STDs had accidentally unraveled what was essentially a criminal enterprise. Clarissa wasn't just a manipulative ex-wife with some medical issues. She was a career criminal who'd been systematically defrauding people for years. "What happens now?" I asked. Mrs. Richardson smiled, and it wasn't a particularly warm expression. "Now we wait for the FBI to finish building their case. Based on what we've uncovered, your ex-wife is looking at multiple felony charges across several states. Her days of manipulating people are about to come to a very permanent end." 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my apartment on a lazy Saturday morning, eating cereal straight from the box while watching the final act of the Clarissa drama unfold on my laptop screen like the world's most satisfying Netflix documentary. Except this wasn't fiction. This was real life, finally delivering the kind of poetic justice that usually only exists in movies where the good guys actually win and the bad guys get exactly what they deserve. The FBI raid had happened on a Tuesday morning. I didn't witness it personally, but thanks to the magic of social media and nosy neighbors with smartphones, the whole thing was documented better than most Hollywood productions. Clarissa's luxury apartment, the one that Victor had been paying for, naturally, was swarmed by federal agents carrying boxes of evidence out like they were moving day volunteers on steroids. The local news had picked up the story, and watching the reporter stand outside Clarissa's building while describing her as a suspected serial fraudster who targeted successful men through elaborate romantic scams was honestly better than winning the lottery. The cheering at the bottom of the screen read, "Local woman arrested in multi-state fraud scheme," and I may have rewound that part 3 or 4 times just to savor the moment. Clarissa's mugshot, when it was released, was absolutely priceless. Gone was the carefully curated Instagram goddess with perfect makeup and designer clothes. In her place was a disheveled woman who looked like she'd finally realized that actions have consequences and that the bill for years of manipulation had finally come due. Her hair was a mess, her makeup was smeared, and she had the expression of someone who'd just discovered that federal prison doesn't have a spa program. The charges were extensive enough to make your head spin. Mail fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, credit card fraud, bank fraud. Basically every type of fraud that doesn't involve fake Nigerian princes or extended car warranties. The FBI had built a case so solid it could probably survive a nuclear blast, complete with financial records, forged documents, testimony from multiple victims, and enough digital evidence to fill a small library. My phone had been ringing constantly with calls from reporters wanting to interview the ex-husband who exposed the scheme, but I'd politely declined all of them. This wasn't about getting my 15 minutes of fame or publicly gloating about my ex-wife's downfall. This was about finally being able to breathe without wondering when the next shoe was going to drop. Victor had reached out a few days after the arrest, asking if I wanted to grab a beer and talk about the whole surreal experience. Turns out, he was actually a pretty decent guy who'd just had the misfortune of being Clarissa's latest target. We met at a sports bar downtown, and it was honestly one of the most therapeutic conversations I'd had in years. "I owe you everything," he said, raising his beer in a toast. "If you hadn't left that note, I probably would have married her, combined our finances, and ended up financially ruined like the other guys." "You don't owe me anything," I replied, clinking my bottle against his. "I just told you the truth. Everything that happened after that was her own doing." We spent the evening comparing notes about Clarissa's manipulation tactics, and it was like talking to a fellow survivor of some bizarre psychological experiment. Victor had fallen for the same sob stories, the same emergencies that required financial help, the same promises of a perfect future together once her temporary difficulties were resolved. The crazy part, Victor said, is that I actually thought I was rescuing her from you. She made you sound like this controlling, abusive monster who destroyed her self-esteem and left her afraid to trust anyone. Classic Clarissa move, I laughed. She probably had you convinced that buying her expensive gifts was helping her heal from the trauma of our marriage. Jewelry for her anxiety, spa treatments for her depression, shopping therapy for her PTSD from your emotional abuse. Victor listed off with a rueful shake of his head. I must have spent 40 grand in 6 months just trying to help her feel better about herself. But here's the beautiful thing about finally understanding that you're not crazy. All those years of self-doubt and wondering if maybe you really were the problem just evaporate like morning fog. Talking to Victor, Helena, and the other victims through the FBI investigation, I realized that Clarissa's manipulation had been so sophisticated that any reasonable person would have fallen for it. The really satisfying part came when the full scope of her criminal enterprise became public. The FBI had uncovered financial fraud totaling over $200,000 across multiple victims, identity theft affecting at least 12 people, and a pattern of deception that spanned nearly a decade. She wasn't just a bad girlfriend or a manipulative ex-wife. She was a career criminal who'd been systematically destroying people's lives for profit. Marcus, her tough guy brother who'd threatened me on Facebook, had suddenly gone very quiet online. No more posts about family honor or threats against cowards who attack his sister. Funny how family loyalty evaporates when federal criminal charges enter the picture. Elena, the paralegal cousin who'd been sending me legal threats, had apparently decided that her law career was more important than defending a federal criminal. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, had been following the whole situation and was honestly more excited about it than I was. This is the best possible outcome, he told me during our session. You didn't seek revenge, you didn't engage in her drama. You simply told the truth and let the consequences unfold naturally. That's exactly the kind of healthy boundary setting we've been working on. Healthy boundary setting. Who knew that leaving a note on a windshield qualified as psychological growth? My mom called me after seeing the news coverage, and for the first time in years, she sounded genuinely proud of me. I always knew that woman was trouble, she said. But I'm so proud of how you handled everything. You did the right thing, sweetheart. Even Mrs. Chun, my elderly neighbor who'd offered to protect me with pepper spray, knocked on my door with another casserole and a newspaper clipping about Clarissa's arrest. Good riddance to bad rubbish, she declared with the satisfaction of someone who'd correctly identified a threat to the neighborhood. The strangest part of the whole experience was how normal my life had become. I could go to Starbucks without scanning the room for familiar faces. I could check my phone without wondering what fresh hell was waiting in my notifications. I could sleep through the night without anxiety dreams about dramatic confrontations or legal threats from paralegal cousins. For the first time in years, I felt like I could actually move forward instead of constantly looking over my shoulder. I'd even started dating again, cautiously, carefully, but without the paranoid fear that every woman I met might be hiding some elaborate deception. The final chapter of the Clarissa saga came when her sentencing was announced. 5 years in federal prison, full restitution to all victims, and a lifetime ban from opening credit accounts without court supervision. Justice, as it turns out, has a sense of humor and occasionally delivers exactly what people deserve. As I sat there that Saturday morning, finishing my cereal and watching the sun stream through my apartment windows, I realized that I'd finally achieved something I'd thought was impossible. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from winning or getting revenge, but the deeper peace that comes from knowing that truth eventually prevails, and that sometimes the universe actually gets it right. Clarissa had finally met her match in the form of federal law enforcement and her own criminal stupidity. And me? I was just a guy eating cereal in his underwear, grateful to be boring and drama-free for the first time in years.